Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday live stream. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we are going to have a pretty intense conversation called the Electric Apocalypse and Ahriman's prison planet, Hive Mind. So we're going to be dealing with some pretty heavy stuff today. So before we dive in, that lecture is probably going to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours in total. And at the end, I will take your questions. So throughout this lecture, in the chat, wherever you are, write the word question and then your question. And then Wolf will take that and he'll send it to me. And at the end of the lecture, I will have all your questions and I will do as many as I can. Okay. So this lecture is really the second lecture in a series that I started not last Sunday, but the Sunday before. And it was called The War of All Against All. And in that lecture series, in that lecture, we really explored a lot of current events and the spiritual reasons why this could be going on. And we focused more so on our time and maybe the next 1,000 years or so. Pretty much our period of development now. But this lecture, we're actually going to be going around 4,000 years in the future, to the very end of this cultural age, to the end of the post-Atlantean epoch, and the last cultural age where there's actually a spiritual battle that takes place. And so this lecture isn't so much about the political side of things, the material side of things. We did that last time. This lecture is really about the spiritual battle of the War of All Against All and how that is going to take place in the future. And so I will put the last lecture and this lecture in a playlist called End Times, very appropriately called End Times. And I have several more lectures that I'm going to do in this series, and they'll all be underneath this playlist. So if you are joining me at another time, you can find all the lectures there. Okay. All right. So we're going to start this lecture with a very provocative quote from Rudolf Steiner. And this entire lecture is actually based in anthroposophy. And so Rudolf Steiner made this really provocative, enigmatic statement in a few of his lectures. And I think that we'll focus in on this statement and this dynamic, and we'll craft our conversation around it, okay? So here's the quote. In the 7th post-Atlantean cultural epoch, to be precise, this war of all against all will break out in the most terrible way. Great and mighty forces will ensue from discoveries that will turn the entire globe into a kind of self-functioning electrical apparatus. And then here's another translation of it. Great and mighty forces will be let loose by the discoveries of material science, turning the whole Earth globe into a kind of self-functioning live electric mass. Wow. Remember that this is in 1904. And for those of you who want to know what lecture series this is in GA 93. And let me know in the chat right now and in the comment section, what do you think that means? What do you think it means to have the Earth turned into a self-functioning, live, living, electric mass? a self-functioning electrical apparatus. What does it mean if the Earth turns into that at the end of our post-Atlantean epoch, which is about 4,000 or so years from now, will be the beginning of the last epoch will start. What does that mean to you? Let me know in the comments and in the chat. So, along with this very interesting quote, there was a little bit more information that I'll fill you guys in on. So with this, he also says that individuals will basically try to turn the Earth into a machine. And this will really characterize the end of our age. This mechanicalness, right? And this electricity, and also radiation and magnetism, this use of these technologies to almost encompass the Earth. And for clarity, the seventh epoch, the seventh cultural age, begins in the year 5067. So that's the timeline in which this will begin to happen. And it's called the American epoch. So according to Rudolf Steiner, this is brought about by unethical scientists that are driven by selfishness. So it's also in this lecture series, this caution around the splitting of the atom and getting to the level of the atom and sort of beginning to hack nature itself. And the argument is that the more we begin to create machines and hack the atom, the more moral we become. And that if society does not become extremely moral and extremely ethical and really spiritual, then this movement into the obsession with natural science and scientific dogmas actually will destroy humanity. And so the control of the atom is sort of the beginning, almost like a ceremonial beginning of this psychotic process by these scientists, and that are really religious, but they begin this impulse that culminates in this electric Earth, this false synthetic electric Earth that becomes created. All right. And the other thing that is significant about the next cultural epochs in the post-Atlantean epoch is, or the last period of our age, to make it simple, is that the Earth is actually spiritualizing. So the Earth is actually losing matter. Okay, it's actually becoming an astral form again. And so it's really important to keep that in mind, because the Earth is kind of going through a rebirth process. And this happens when the Earth is about to basically release itself from matter completely. And at this period of time, the war of all against all, it really reaches its height, and it becomes a spiritual battle. It is sort of like the world begins to change and be almost whittled down to its spiritual roots. And so this last period is a direct spiritual battle between good and evil, and really a spiritual battle for the soul and for the human being. And that's how it's portrayed. Okay, and so how the battle really occurs, and this is sort of what we talked about in last lecture, is that there's this bifurcation that occurs where certain people are anchoring into higher forces, into the heavenly realms or the higher spiritual planes, and then other people are sort of anchoring more into the lower subplanes. And that's what causes the bifurcation, as well as the development of the I, or the individuality. Okay. Okay. So in order to really understand this very unusual quote, we have to understand very well two principles. Okay. The first principle that we have to know really well is the mystery of death and also the mystery of rebirth. So the mystery of death and rebirth. And we also have to understand what the subatomic realms are, or what the subearthly realms are. Okay, if we understand those two things, we can understand the end of our age and what we will be facing a lot easier. So you have probably heard of the subearthly or the subnatural realms before. They're often referred to, but I do want to kind of clarify the language a little bit and clarify the concept. So when I say subearthly, I'm not talking about sort of the modern concept of inner earth, as though you can go into a cavern system and go deep in the earth and this kind of thing. It's not a physical concept. It is actually a spiritual concept. So it's really a etheric and astral overlay that is around the earth. Okay. And so you can't get to it physically. You actually there has to be a change in the condition of your being to get there. And the only time that can happen is really through death or perhaps meditation or something like that. But this is something that is a spirit. These are spiritual planes. Okay. And the subplanes have been described in a lot of spiritual literature and a lot of myths. And usually you'll hear these stories about these angels that are being cast out of heaven, or these beings that become trapped in the lower planes. This is the subearthly realm. This is the subatomic realm. Okay, that's where these forces get cast down into. And the subrealms, the subnatural realms, are characterized by being mechanical. That's what makes them different. That's what makes them subhuman. Subnatural is that they're actually, in a way, behind developmentally, especially when you consider that our challenge in our era is to develop our individuality, our I, and to develop a soul. Well, these realms don't have that development. They are defined by being mechanical. Everything there is like a machine. Everything there is mechanical. There's no soul. Okay, so that is what defines the subatomic realms, the subearthly realms. And in our culture, in our life, we would really see someone behaving mechanically as being a psychopath. That is basically the definition of a psychopath, is someone who behaves without empathy, without compassion, without thought, right? So essentially that is the nature of the subatomic planes. It's mechanical, and we would consider it to be psychopathic, right? Behaving like a robot without empathy and compassion, that's not something that's going to be healthy and good. So just so we can visualize the subplanes in the big picture and the grand scale of things, what you have is, if you want to look at the heavens and the earth and the subplanes, you'd have the higher planes or the heavens on top, which are whole and complete, and the archetypal truth. Okay. And then you have the earth. And then shown beneath the earth, you'd have the subplanes. Okay. So the earth is sort of in between the archetypal, heavenly planes, right? The true higher realms that are whole and complete. And then there's these planes beneath us called the sub realms, or the subearthly, or the subatomic realms, that are of decay, and they are basically an exact mirror inversion of the earthly and heavenly planes. Okay, so it's if you can imagine it being an exact mirror image. an exact inversion. That's what the subplanes are. So when a force comes into being in the heavenly realms, that is automatically mirrored in an exact inversion in the lower planes. Something comes to be in the sub-earthly planes that is an exact opposition to the higher force that is created. All right. When something is created in the earthly plane, there is an exact opposite created in the subplanes. And so a really good example of this is that making up the mechanics of the heavenly realms, we have a Trinity, which is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay. Now, in the lower planes beneath the earth, in their energy, there's also an unholy Trinity. Okay, and this is Sorath and the Asuras. Okay, and then we have Ahriman, and then we have Lucifer. So there is a holy Trinity that exists in the higher heavenly planes, right? And then there's an exact inversion of it. It's reflected darkly in the sub-earthly planes, and that is beneath the earth. That is always portrayed as being beneath the earth because it is life in a state of decay, life in a state of inversion. It's not really whole. Okay. Now, space-wise, just to be clear, everything is sharing the same space. It's just in a different frequency. It's just in a different, the energy has a different character, but it's all sharing the same space. But we have to we have to put a diagram of being below and above in order to show the nature of the realms, not the actual positioning of them. Okay. All right. So the subplanes are an inversion or a shadow of the natural world, our earth, and the supernatural world, the heavens. There are powerful dark forces that directly oppose God, the Father, Christ, and the Holy Spirit, which are called the Asuras and Sorath, Ahriman, and Lucifer. Humanity must face these shadow forces within themselves to evolve. These shadow forces catalyze humanity into a higher being if they can be redeemed or integrated through Christ within. So although these forces are in direct opposition to us, and if you were to encounter them astrally, which I'm sure many of you have at some point, you would be terrified. There's no doubt about it. These are horrifying forces, right? But we use these forces ultimately to grow. And it's part of a larger mechanism of evolution in our cosmos. So one of the things that can make learning core concepts in esoterica really difficult is that something will have like 10 different names, because spirituality right now is sort of like an amalgamation of a bunch of different traditions and a bunch of different individuals seeing things and interpreting things. And so there's so much different language essentially for the same thing. And that actually makes concepts very hard to learn. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to list all of the different names for the sub-earthly plane, because today we're really going to focus in on that sub-earthly realm or the subatomic realm. We're going to really, really know what it is. So let's create a consensus here in language. You'd probably hear the subnatural plane being called the subplanes, the subatomic plane, the elemental plane, the subnatural plane or subnature. In anthroposophy, it's often called subnature or subnatural, subearthly, the subterranean realms, the subterranean spheres. This is also important when you start learning about the subatomic realm, the subatomic plane. Some traditions will actually show it as spheres within the earth, because as the earth was created, it was as though certain layers were created one at a time. And those layers are represented in the cosmos as different planetary spheres. So that is represented in the earth, right? But also we're surrounded by those same spheres outside the earth. So you may hear the same concept being called subterranean realms or subterranean spheres, because you also can break down the makeup of the inner earth as being essentially different spheres, being connected to the different planetary spheres. You may hear it called the inner earth realms, or just the lower realms. Most commonly in the New Age, you'll hear it being called the lower astral. So basically, when people start using the words lower astral, lower planes, lower realms, they're talking about the subearthly realms. They're talking about the subatomic realms, the subatomic plane. That's what that is. And in anthroposophy, it also is the eighth sphere. It becomes the eighth sphere. Okay. And you'll hear about these different beings from the lower astral plane being called subhuman or inhuman, because this plane is a plane of decay, and nothing truly human can exist in it, not unless that humanness is fully integrated into their being. Okay, so they're often called the subhuman realms, the inhuman realms. You're kind of getting the picture here, right? And again, this is not the physical inside of the earth. If you would try to physically get into the earth, to these realms, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to do it. So this is definitely not one of those inner earth teachings, which is sort of like more talking about a cavern system in the earth that exists that may have some ancient species of life in it from Atlantis and things like that. That's a different teaching. This is the spiritual, this is the sort of different spiritual dimensions that exist within the inner earth. Okay. Okay, so the subearthly realms were always really important in ancient mystery schools and ancient teachings. And this is because the human soul, the human being, actually passes into the subearthly upon our death. So actually traversing these realms is part of our death process. And this is why you'll see in a lot of religious literature, you'll see certain realms being portrayed in the earth, and you'll see the soul going into the earth. And there's all these myths about going into Hades and things like that. Well, the soul will do that when it dies, and it is absolutely necessary that the soul passes through these subplanes as it begins to go through its death process. And for the soul, when it's going through this, it's really a mirroring process that goes on. It's an unwinding that goes on. So the soul is, you basically will experience all of your thoughts, and especially all of your lower desires that you've had, whatever you have attachments to, whatever your mind has been thinking, especially in the negative sense, you experience that. as part of your death. You have to, in order to understand who you are and why you're doing things. And in order to improve upon yourself, upon your next incarnation, you have to face your shadow. You have to face your darkness. And this is the realm where that is done. And so you go through this process of mirroring and unwinding and kind of confronting yourself and the forces that you've cultivated in your life. And we face archetypal forces that challenge us as well. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depending on the life that you've lived. And so you sort of, in one way that I was reading about this, I think it was in the Eastern tradition, the way that this text was describing it was that you sort of experience your own mind until you become exhausted. And so you become kind of exhausted in your own, you sort of become exhausted in the feeling of your own attachments. And then you move on. And and it's really funny because I feel like in the West, we don't really have a stomach for this. And the moment that someone says that the death process has a challenging aspect, or that there's karma, or that you have to see a negative thing that you did, or you have to feel your own negativity, people are like, no, I'm going to create a dream scenario where there's no negativity and nothing ever happens. But that's not realistic. And that's not what basically every single mystery tradition has taught. Because the mystery traditions would spend an incredible amount of time teaching their students how to die. That was one of the main teachings. Obviously, in the Tibetan tradition, there's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which talks all about how to pass through the sub-earthly realms and what you will experience in every single layer of the inner earth. There's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was the same thing. There were different First Nations traditions that would have dances and put people through experiences that they thought they were going to encounter when they passed away. There were all kinds of rituals after someone passed away in order to help them go through this process of death, because the sub-earthly realm was actually very challenging to pass through. So that's the reality of that process. In myths and in religious literature, there's different names for the subnatural world and for these inner planes. And in Christianity, you'll hear it being called hell and purgatory. And also there's different names, like in the Bible, which is Tartarus, which was really interesting. It's also called the abyss, Hades, which is the Greek version of hell, the underworld. And in Buddhism, there is the Nakara realms, or the Naraka realms. And the Buddhist version of the planes in the inner earth is really interesting because it's very similar to Anthroposophy, but then Anthroposophy goes into a little bit more detail. But in the Buddhist version of passing through the subrealms, it is always a contraction between hot and cold. So there's this expansive period, and then there's a contractive period, an expansive period and a contractive period. And if you study in Anthroposophy, this is greatly gone into detail, the 9 layers of the inner earth. And it's true, there's an expansion and a contraction, or a fructifying and then a pulling in. And that's actually what breaks the earthly essence off of the soul and brings the soul back to its core. So it's this expanding and contraction, which in the Buddhist tradition, in the Naraka realms, it is this process of literally releasing yourself from your earthly life. This expansion and contraction is almost like a washing, a cleansing of your soul, releasing itself from all of its earthly thoughts and all of its material nature, because a lot of that could be a lie, right? And ultimately, you can see the passage through this as being a way to your truth. It's returning to spirit again, but you have to go through this cleansing process that's associated with passing through the inner earth. Okay, and so it's also called Kamaloka in Theosophy and in Eastern traditions. It's called Amenti in the Egyptian mystery tradition. And we actually have a modern death myth, which is Dante's Divine Comedy. I don't know if you guys have read that or seen. There's actually a really great silent film with Dante's Divine Comedy where he basically goes into the sub-realms. He goes into the inner earth and he encounters all of these things, and he encounters these different archons and these fallen entities that are trapped there. And it's really cool. It's a modern day death myth that is really well done. So besides the inner earth being characterized by being mechanical, it's also characterized by a process of decay. So that's sort of what is going on. Your body begins to break down and decay, but also as you pass through these realms upon your death, anything that's not true and anything that's not real will be pulled away from you. You'll have to confront it, and it will go through a process of decay, right? That's why it's so important in your waking life to live a life of truth and to live a life of morals and virtue, is because there really is no escaping the evil you do to yourself and the evil that you do to others. There literally is no escaping it, because you will have to experience it, because all of that is a lie. All of that is untrue. It's something that happens through delusion, and we have to confront every single delusion that we have as we go through this journey into the subplanes. And a lot of initiation in the mystery schools as well was about preparing the soul, purifying the soul, so that again this process would become easier and easier and easier. And then of course you have eventually the mystery of Golgotha, and you have Christ, who only had to spend, there was only 3 days before he was in his glorified form. And that is also a very deep mystery, is think about how advanced someone would have to be in order to pass through the lower spheres that quick and retain their etheric body and have their resurrection body exist. Most people have to keep incarnating. So also when you understand the subplanes, you also can understand the importance of Christ as well, and resurrection, right? So for those of you who want to go even deeper into the subplanes, Rudolf Steiner has phenomenal lectures on them, and they're basically called the 9 layers of the earth. I won't be able to do that today, just because we want to focus on the electrical mass and the subplanes in relation to that. But if you want to go deeper on that, then knock yourself out. It's incredible. And I'll also have more resources that appear in the description box probably tomorrow for you. Okay, so we know that these sub-earthly planes exist. We know that when we die, we pass through them. But what kind of beings exist in the sub-earthly? Like, who is down there? Like, what kind of forces are there? So essentially, there's 2 kinds of forces that exist in this inner world. And the first kind is basically what you would call neutral elemental entities, kind of neutral deities. And these deities or elementals, they specifically deal with death and decay. They're not evil, they're not dark, they just are the spiritual forces that deal with death. They carry out the functions of death. They carry out the function of destruction. They carry out the function of decay. Now, we are disgusted by that as human beings because we have a relationship with death. We have thoughts about it. We have fears about it. We are repulsed by decay, right? But there are spiritual forces, cosmic forces, that's what they do. They carry out the function of death. And it's death is a necessary function, and they carry that out as neutral entities. So those beings are there, and they're elementals. And there's some deities that carry that out as well. That's very clear in the Egyptian, teachings. But basically, you can view them as, these mechanical sort of, they're not a machine, but they carry out the function of death. And then you have entities that we would consider to be evil. We have fallen beings. So the beings that are unable to move forward with the life wave of the earth and with humanity, they get cast into the inner earth. They get cast into the subplanes. Now, the reason why they're there is because they're unable to develop a quality. They're unable to develop certain qualities that allow them to incarnate into a body or just move forward in evolution. So anyone that's behind in evolution, they get cast into the lower astral plane, they get cast into the 8th sphere, the subatomic plane, and that's where they exist. So every single fallen angel, every single fallen entity has fallen because they've lacked development. And you cannot have that. The earth moves on. The cosmos moves on. Everything evolves. And so if you're unable to do that, you're sort of turning your back on God. If you refuse to evolve, what's really going on is you're turning your back on God. And your very nature is then cast down into these lower spheres. So you have basically every single fallen being, is down there. So we know that in the earlier period around the Lemurian age, you see that Lucifer was cast down, and all of the angels that were within his host were also cast down. And in the Bible, there's some really interesting passages that actually describe like where Lucifer is, and sort of the inner sanctum where these basically like these archons, these fallen angels are basically existing, but they're chained to what we would see as like the core of the earth, and they're unable to leave. And Ahriman was also cast down, but Ahriman was sort of cast down in an earlier period than even Lucifer, really. And so you also have angels that fell more recently from in Anthroposophy, we call them the spirits of darkness or the angels of darkness. And these are angels that fell in around 1879 in the last battle in heaven. And they're Ahrimanic angels. So they're angels that are within the Ahrimanic host. And they're also fallen and within the earth. And there's other essences that are there that are developmentally behind, that are backwards, and that are what we would consider evil. And so this is the real meaning of the devil card. If you've ever seen the devil card, it's essentially, like Satan, this dark force that has people chained to him. And this is the dark mystery of our consciousness, which is that if you behave in a way that is, selfish, that's evil, then you basically begin to tether yourself to these lower planes, to these lower worlds, to actual deities in the lower astral plane. You begin to form a relationship with them. These are real spiritual entities that you begin to tether yourself to, that begin to consume your energy, and you begin to think thoughts that are associated with them, and it begins this process of connection. And that is represented in the devil card in the tarot. It is this being bound to the lower centers of the body, right? The lower three centers also correspond with the lower planes. So you're like locked into this lower system, this kind of, if it is to reach its full conclusion, you become mechanical, right? You become even psychopathic. And this is the real risk to humanity. Okay. But what really characterizes it as well is that the beings there don't have an I. They don't have an individuality, and they don't have a soul. They never developed it. That's what really characterizes them. And that's why they also operate in a complete and total hive mind, and a hierarchy, a dark hierarchy that is around vampirism and parasitism. That's what it's about down there. So the sub-earthly planes are the lower spiritual realms of the earth, and the soul must pass through them before rising into the heavenly planes. There are beings that reside in the subterranean spheres, and some are neutral and just carry out the functions of death, and some are evil and have been cast down into that world. The sub-earthly is characterized by being machine-like, mechanical, due to no individuality being developed and the beings there having no soul. Okay. So we know about death. We know about the sub-earthly spheres. What does this have to do with the electrified earth mentioned by Rudolf Steiner? Okay. So let's read it one more time and see if anything comes to you. In the 7th post-Atlantean cultural epoch, to be precise, this war of all against all will break out in the most terrible way. Great and mighty forces will ensue from discoveries that will turn the entire globe into a kind of self-functioning electrical apparatus. One more time. Great and mighty forces will be let loose by the discoveries of material science, turning the whole Earth globe into a kind of self-functioning, live, electric mass. So what does death and the subplanes have to do with that? Let's explore. So the Earth also goes through a death and rebirth. Not just human beings. The Earth has a period of life and also a period of death, and then a period of rebirth. And these are tracked exactly in anthroposophy, and even before the Western traditions existed, they were tracked exactly in the Indian tradition, and ever since they were called the breaths of Brahma. They were called the Manvantara and the Pralaya. So the cycles of the earth have been tracked. These larger cycles of death and rebirth have been tracked by virtually every single mystery tradition that we have had. They form the structure of our development. Now, it's kind of frustrating because, modern science does not acknowledge this, but this has actually been the staple of, our understanding of human creation and evolution from the beginning. So the earth goes through a death and rebirth, just like human beings do. And I mentioned this actually in my esoteric keys to disclosure lecture in my video about the Mars line. And when the earth goes through a process of death, it turns into a corpse. And there's an astral spirit form that leaves and that goes and interacts with the higher spheres. And that's what gives the earth, the spirit of the earth, sort of the influences cosmically in order to begin again. It's how the earth stays connected to all of its brother and sister spheres. And the sun is this re-amalgamation that happens in the astral when the earth is passing through its death and rebirth process. And it does this in small ways all the time, and also in really big ways when you reach the end of an epoch. But the period where the earth begins to transition from death to birth is kind of a vulnerable period. There's a lot going on the planet, and there's a lot at stake. It's kind of like musical chairs, where you often have two streams of consciousness that are splitting, and two different consciousnesses that are developing. One is representing the new earth, right? In the new age, it's called the 5D earth, an ascension. And then in anthroposophy, we call it, essentially preparing for new Jupiter, or, in esoteric Christianity, it's called New Jerusalem. This exists in every single tradition. And so what ends up happening is on the death and rebirth arc, there's a lot of vulnerability with the planet. There's a lot of things shuffling around. People are really pressurized to wake up. There's conflict, and people have inner conflict, to figure out, who am I? Am I going to align with higher forces and face my fears? Or am I going to collapse into, my worst fears? And so this is this war of all against all, this battle that happens creates a lot of vulnerability. There's a lot up for grabs, between both sides, good and evil. And so during this death and rebirth, the fallen forces want to gain some control of the earth as it passes. They want to sort of try to gain influence and gain control of the earth, and really kind of freeze it and pull it into, keep it in the material plane. Okay. So before we get too much into that freezing of the earth, let's get into how Rudolf Steiner described this. And this is from the book, The Electronic Doppelganger, which I highly recommend. And in this passage, Rudolf Steiner describes how the earth, at the end of a developmental period, basically turns into a corpse. And he calls the earth a corpse. And he describes that he describes how humanity must begin to evolve into a spiritual life in order to rise spiritually. And if we don't, we'll sort of be pulled downwards into this world of death, this world of merging with the subplanes, if you will. And this is what he says. But the earth will become a corpse in the future, and human beings as souls would be faced with the terrible prospect of condemning themselves to inhabiting a future corpse, unless they decide to familiarize themselves with the spiritual world and put down roots in the spiritual world. So we have to actively seek a spiritual life. And that is actually what allows us to spiritualize. And as we spiritualize, there will be a shell of the earth, really a corpse of the earth that will remain for a period of time. And that will have these sort of fallen forces in it, in this kind of chaos as things split. So you literally have the corpse of the earth, and then you have sort of this, like a butterfly, you have this etheric, astral body that's rising from it. It's the resurrection body of the earth. The earth is resurrecting. This is why the understanding, the teachings of esoteric Christianity is so important, because that tradition comes in to prepare humanity for this event. It is directly for that. Okay? Because that event, this idea of ascension, spiritualization, or in the Christian mysteries, resurrection, this characterizes our future. It is the main thing about our future. We have to understand it on a planetary level, but also on an individual level. Okay? There is a glorified etheric body, which is the resurrection body, which is the higher form of the earth that will emerge from the corpse. And the corpse will remain in this sort of quasi-material state for a period of time before it collapses downward and inward and becomes food for the eighth sphere and the subplanes. That's what we're looking at the end of the post-Atlantean epoch. Okay? And again, this is, in around 4,000 years or so. Okay. So for those of you who, I'll just go into a little bit of how the earth will transform, just for anyone who is tuning in that hasn't seen it before. And then we'll get into the occult secret of electricity. So how the earth transforms is that the actual matter of the earth begins to decay. And that's already happening. We're already having the matter of the earth beginning to spiritualize, and your body begins to be less and less dense over time. So if you were to pass away now and then incarnate in the future, the body that you incarnate into will actually be less dense. So this is the arc that we're moving into. And this is where we get into the bifurcation again. We went into this very deep in our last lecture, where you get the splitting of streams of consciousness. People who are able to process this splitting of worlds, and people who are unable to do that, because you really have to have your individuality and your I developed. And so again, some people are tethered into the angelic world, and they are evolving with the life wave. They're spiritualizing, they're harmonizing with the earth, right? And then there's another group that's going to come forward that is not doing that, and they are completely tethered into the subatomic world. They're completely tethered into the eighth sphere, and all of their thoughts are coming from that realm. They're possessed by it. They're possessed by the beings and the forces that are within that realm, because the human being is a vehicle, and we're either tethered to higher forces or lower forces. And so part of that lower wave is people literally being tethered into and bound in with these lower demonic forces. And of course, what happens when you get bound in with these lower demonic forces, they want you to do their deeds on the planet. Okay. And they lie to you, and they make you say, oh, you're going to be so powerful if you carry out this dark plan that we have, right? And so people get very caught up in that. And when that happens, they're really just getting caught up in that lower dimensional hive mind, right? Because in order to communicate with these beings and be part of that, they actually destroy your soul. They destroy your I development. They're parasitic. And so you become more and more bound with that world. Okay. And the more and more bound and trapped with this lower stream, the fallen stream you are, the more like them you become, and the more worldly power you seek, the more worldly control you seek, the more money you seek, the more you crave worldly material things, because you're being drained, right? And so when you are able to understand how your energy body actually works, you begin to not see the material world as the prize, and you begin to operate from a higher spiritual place. And so humanity is very much right now, and will be for the next several thousand years, deciding where they are in this. It's okay if you want to be able to buy things and eat and stuff like that. I'm not trying to cast a stark thing here, like you can't enjoy material things, but it's the obsession with it, and it's thinking that all of your joy is going to come from that. That is straight from the subworlds that are hyper material, that are parasitic, and that just keep you bound in this process of, material existence. Okay. And so the people, the lower stream in the bifurcation, they sort of will be driven to create different apparatuses and machines that use electricity, radiation, magnetism to create like a false, aura around the earth, to create to basically bathe the earth in with these synthetic frequencies, electricity, magnetism, radiation, and even a kind of fallen ether that's charged with thoughts. And this is really the highest goal of Sorath and Ahriman and Lucifer and these darker forces in the center of the earth, is really to create machines and apparatuses that basically change the nature of the earth into the subplanes. And that's what they really want to do. So you see this direct battle going on between people who obviously see these technologies that are going to come about as being unnecessary, and a desire to return to understanding that the earth is complete, that the natural world is perfect, and that we have to harmonize with it. We have to take care of the earth. This impulse is also the Mars impulse. It's also the fallen Mars impulse. If you know my earlier work, it is the desire to become a space god, to abandon the earth. All of these impulses are connected, and it is a fallen impulse directly. So those that are tethered to the higher streams, the angelic streams, they get different impulses. They get impulses to become more human, more compassionate, more loving, more, genuinely community, spiritually oriented. They want to harmonize, and they just begin to operate from a completely different paradigm, while this other stream goes in a totally different way. And the goal of demonic forces trapped in the subterranean spheres is ultimately to control the process of death and rebirth, in such a way that they benefit by siphoning off of life forces. So because the subplanes are the planes of death, a lot of black magic, a lot of the impulse of fallen entities and people caught in their web is they want to use the forces of death. They want to control the soul. They want to try to control the process of death and the forces that are emitted when people die and things like it gets very dark, and I'm not going to get too much into it, but I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. These fallen demonic forces, they work in the sphere of death, even controlling these elemental beings that carry out the process of death. That's their whole thing, which is why a lot of people who have examined, these different secret societies, they usually just walk away and they're like, this is a death cult. I mean, that's what this is. And it's like, yeah, because that's what the forces are literally in the realm of death. They have no I developed. They have no soul, so they cannot be reborn properly. So yeah, they can only use those forces of death. So this is a really important thing that I want to reiterate, because I think that society still thinks about Black magicians in a medieval way. So they think about Merlin with like his pouch of herbs and his staff, or like some dark magician, summoning something with like this complex, Enochian magic symbol, right? Now, that stuff's still valid, it's still used, but the vast majority of satanic rituals today are done with something else, which is through technology. Now, the other day, I coined a term called Techno-Satanism. And Techno-Satanism is basically the use of technologies to summon and tap into these lower planes physically. Now, there used to be natural barriers to the spirit world. You used to have to be initiated to a certain degree in order to even contact certain entities. You could always contact lower entities, they're always hanging around, but there were certain natural barriers that existed when people were practicing black magic, when people were wanting to summon demonic entities to do their bidding or to walk the earth. There were barriers because, the world was still in a natural condition and man was not yet playing God. They couldn't play God. But the moment that natural science has now moved into creating all of these super technologies, now those barriers are gone. There aren't the natural barriers of the black magician in the 1500s or even, 1,000 years ago. So these technologies are removing the natural barriers of protection that the world would have from dark magicians. Okay, and I want that to be very clear, because I think that there is sort of this idea in modern times that, again, that black magic and connecting with these dark things is still at the period of John Dee. It is not, and it hasn't been for a long time. And that is something that we have to directly confront. We have to directly confront that in our lifetime and in our lifetimes to come. It's something that we have to grasp. We have to learn what it is. We have to understand it, how it works, which means we have to understand the subatomic plane and the subrealms of the earth. We have to understand the death process, and we have to understand what the earth is going to go through in its final periods before it rises into the higher earth. Okay, these are all things that we seriously need to understand well. Okay, so I called that section Possession, Techno-Satanism, and Possessed Scientists. And the thing that I also want to say about these techno-Satanists and their super technologies, these are machines that pierce the veil. These are machines that are messing around with atoms. They're doing things that actually pierce the veil into other worlds. And when you do that, you can become possessed. So operating like something like Cern or a particle accelerator or these other technologies that create massive electrical fields, you may as well be just playing with a Ouija board times 1,000, going into the darkest planes imaginable. That's basically what you may as well be doing. But because we have shunned spiritual science and we've shunned the spiritual world, people don't understand that. We don't understand that. We just think everything's neutral. We just think like if we start communicating with another dimension right? That it's just, oh, what is that? What a mystery. It's not a mystery. It's the subplanes. It's the lower planes. It's the eighth sphere. You're tapping into the eighth sphere. There's no mystery. It's like, ooh, what are we communicating with? Let's examine it. It's like you're communicating with the dark realms. And this was known by many different mystery schools before these machines were even invented. They know what forces exist in these lower kingdoms of life. And it is known by the higher adepts in different traditions that the only thing that can really pass into the higher planes is a human soul. That these machines, that all this technology, all this stuff is basically a worshipful thing for the sub-realms. The exception to that is if human society becomes extremely moral and ethical. Then you can start getting into some different kinds of technologies and things that are different. But as long as humanity is immoral and unethical, which we are right now, the vast majority of humanity may have good inside of them, good potential, but we are not at a place where we're even acknowledging the spiritual world anymore. We're not behaving ethically on the world stage. Many people are not. We have to rise into a much more moral condition before we start using technologies that are going to be piercing the veil and doing all this kind of stuff, because it goes right to the eighth sphere. And those beings down there, they want nothing more than to be released from where they are, because where they are is literal hell. Okay? So when people start to use these technologies, they actually begin to behave differently. These technologies can, because of the forces that they use, people can become possessed. And I actually think that that's what happens, is that people will begin to do these experiments that are super cutting edge, things like Cern, other things that pierce the veil, that, splitting the atom, things like this. And they end up releasing all of these forces and they become possessed. You can have someone probably that just is a scientist, that's an atheist or an agnostic or something. But then once you start doing this and you're not prepared, you don't have any spiritual education, you don't have any spiritual development, you're like a sitting duck for these forces. A lot of people who work in the scientific fields, they're like a sitting duck because they don't have any spiritual training. And yet they're going to crack open basically the subatomic planes, which are full of some of the darkest, most evil forces we can imagine. So this is why it's very important for us to understand what this is, and to speak out against it when we feel like this stuff is going on. We can control, as people, how far this goes. We don't have to just sit by and allow these weird possessed people who love machines and want to merge with them and want to summon all the demons from the pits of hell. I mean, we have a voice. We can say, you know what, I'm not interested in that, actually. We're not sitting ducks here. We just have to not fall for the pitches that this is the way of the future. It's not. The way of the future is harmonizing with the earth. It's not escaping the earth, right? It's not controlling the earth. It's not genetically modifying the earth until nothing natural exists. This is a sickness. This is a sickness. It's not the future. It's not good. It's sick. And we have to be able to see that for what it is. It's possession. And possession is really something that we also need to understand a little bit more as a world. I thought it was very appropriate to have the death mug for this one. Okay. There will also be, in our time, there will be more discoveries about the nature of ether. So one of the things also that Rudolf Steiner says it's really interesting is that in our period, we will obviously and have discovered electricity and magnetism, but we're also going to discover other forces that really are from the sub-world. And we're going to think that they're just pure spiritual forces. Like, I mean, I was, when I was preparing for this lecture, when electricity was just coming out, there were different societies. Some of them were theosophical societies, actually, that were like, electricity is a pure spiritual holy force. And so people were seeing electricity as being a direct expression of God. And it's actually something different. And we're going to get into that in this next section. But, you know, people thought that electricity was going to be a cure-all. And these forces that were really rooted in the subnatural world were going to be creating all these healing devices, sort of like we had in Atlantis when humanity and the earth was in a much more pure condition. And so as soon as these things started coming out, there was again this desire to return to an Atlantean existence where all these forces were sort of pure and they weren't yet forced into the subworld. That's another conversation, but there will be other forces beyond electricity, beyond magnetism, that have to do with ether, that will also be discovered in the next several thousand years, that will become part of how this live electric mass takes shape. So it's not just electricity. This mass around the earth is electricity. It's magnetism. It is radiation. It's a discord of frequencies. And it's also going to be a kind of ether that is charged in a certain way. All right, so that's sort of what these darker forces are going to want to create, and that's what they want to come about. So let's get into the occult secrets of electricity, the mystery of electricity. So the mystery of electricity is, in a way, it is the mystery of the sub-earthly world and the mystery of death. That is an aspect of the occult secret of electricity. And to remind you of this, we don't need to look any further than Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You literally have a deep secret about electricity there, which is that obviously in Frankenstein, you know, the mad scientist goes and gathers up all these dead parts from the cemetery, right? These old dead things. Creates a being with these dead parts. They shouldn't be around anymore. They shouldn't exist. They're dying. But then uses electricity. They wait for a lightning strike and then pulls the lever, and then Frankenstein comes alive. It's the electricity that makes him come alive. This dead thing that really shouldn't exist naturally. And so there's this idea in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that electricity has the power to bring dead things about, to make dead things live, to make dead things walk the earth. So, what is electricity? What actually is electricity? Like, imagine you've got your positive and negative, you've got your arc right here, and you've got it there. What is that? What is that arc? What is that force? That force is dying light. It is decaying light. That's what electricity is. Electricity is decayed light. It's light that is densified. And in a way, the subearthly planes, because they are the world of decay, they are the world of everything that is in a stage of death. The subatomic world is electricity. It is dying light. Now, this is in direct opposition to natural light. Okay? So, natural light, the light from the sun, natural sources of light that aren't summoned by man, right? That is connected to the heavenly planes, the heavenly spheres. But electricity is something else. Electricity is rooted and lives in the subplanes because it is light that is dying. And as it dies, it becomes more and more dense. Okay. So electricity is rooted in the sub-earthly realm. It's rooted in the hell realms. And it is therefore a medium for these harmonic forces to be in and to enter. I'm sure you guys are like, oh, everything around is electricity. So, I mean, I'm not saying this so you have to become a Luddite and like go and move into the woods and be extreme. Again, it's okay. It's just we have to understand what it is. I mean, we can use electricity. We can use technology. We just have to understand what it is, the responsibility of it, what it means for us, and how to use it properly so we can maintain our natural essence and maintain our selves without getting caught up. Okay? Slowly caught up into a very synthetic, artificial way of life because we don't understand the kind of developments that are going on and that they're extreme. So the natural light is rooted in the supernatural heavenly realm, the natural realm, and it's really a medium for angels and for heavenly beings and for those beautiful spiritual hierarchies that are part of our natural world, not fallen. But the Ahrimanic, and Ahriman, by the way, in Steiner's cosmology is basically like Satan. So Steiner has a different sort of description of evil. He places Lucifer and Ahriman as different poles of evil. I have a lecture on that on my channel if you want to watch that, if you don't know. So when I say Ahriman and the Asuras, I'm talking about basically Satan and demonic forces, just for clarification here. So Ahriman and the Asuric forces, the Ahrimanic spirits, the fallen Ahrimanic angels, all the beings in that subworld, they use electricity as its medium. And there's also one really fascinating thing about our relationship with electricity, which is that obviously every human is electric. Our nervous system runs on electrical impulses. If you go get an EKG, you'll see that, right? We're electrical beings. It's fine. And that really symbolizes that electricity in us symbolizes our connection to the subplanes naturally, and also to the harmonic essence, because everything is also within us. Okay, so we have to understand when talking about dark things, the whole point of discussing this is not so that you can be like, whoa, and just push it all away and turn off the lecture and be like, I don't want anything to do with this. The whole point is not trying to avoid this stuff to think that you're going to be unpure if you hear it. No, the whole point is actually being able to integrate that shadow, to integrate that darkness, because we all have harmonic essences and forces within us. We have Luciferic essences and forces within us. We have light and shadow. Our job is to integrate and overcome these forces and ultimately redeem these entities in the lower planes. So it's redemptive. Our whole life is really redemptive. It's an act of we redeem ourselves, and we even redeem other people. We redeem other forces around us. So the whole point in us being here is really to experience these shadows within ourselves, integrate them and overcome them, and even redeem people and forces beyond our own self. That's the point. That's the core of esoteric Christianity. That Christ is the great redeemer. You are the great redeemer. I am the great redeemer. That is within you. That is all of our journey here. So it's not about avoiding these forces and being like, oh, well, if I just don't interact with it, I won't attract it, like law of attraction. No, It is about facing it head on and integrating it. Because I promise you, if you avoid understanding this because it's uncomfortable, that's when it starts to get control, right? So you have to be able to face your shadow. And that is how you become a master, right? So very interestingly, this is very probably one of this is really fascinating within anthroposophy, is that every single human being actually has a doppelganger that is of the Ahrimanic nature. And the collective human doppelganger is Ahriman himself, right? But we all kind of have this Ahrimanic essence, this Ahrimanic spirit that is with us. And we sort of learn from that entity, and it kind of learns from us. Just like we have a guardian angel, right? We're surrounded by these forces, and we're integrating them and working on them. And this Ahrimanic doppelganger, or this Ahrimanic essence, it enters our life it enters our body when we're born, right? And it lives within the electrical system of our body, right? So we are literally a microcosm of heaven and earth, really. And so that's how we learn about the Ahrimanic materialist impulses. We actually have a essence within us that is that we overcome, that we face. And that's where you get the eternal image of Michael slaying Lucifer, Michael slaying the dragon. You have Ahura Mazda that is grabbing Ahriman by the horn and by the dagger and keeping that Ahrimanic force at bay. Why? Because it's within us. You've got to grab it by the horn and grab it by the dagger. You've got to know what it is. You've got to face it. He's facing it. Ahura Mazda is facing Ahriman. He's not running from it. He's facing it. He's saying, what can you teach me? I'm strong. I have Christ within. I can face this. I can transform this. Okay, that's our relationship with these forces. Okay, so that is part of the mystery of electricity. We are electrical beings. We have an aspect of us that is electrical. And according to the anthroposophical system too, electricity didn't even come into the Earth's existence until basically the end of the Lemurian epoch. And it is the essence of old moon. So within the electrical energy are sort of the forces of the old moon, or the forces of moon. Okay. And that is a massive hint and a massive secret about the nature of electricity right there. Okay. And so obviously, if you're like a dark magician, right, you're going to want to use electricity. You're going to be fascinated by it because it allows you to contact this like dark world. And so if you are immoral, if you are a black magician, you're going to be really interested in basically practicing your magical practices of summoning and controlling the world through electrical forces, through magnetism, through all of these essences, because magnetism is also in the subatomic plane, right? Radiation, all this kind of stuff. These are forces that are directly from the subplanes. They're subearthly. They're by nature demonic unless you can rise to such a high level of morality that you can cancel it out. But if someone just goes in there neutrally, they're going to be overtaken. These are incredibly powerful forces. Okay. So electricity itself is not necessarily evil, but it contains these inhuman, subhuman forces because it's dying light. And if you're not aware and you're not striving to build spiritual roots, and you're not striving to live an ethical, moral life, a spiritual life, then it's very easy for these forces to overtake. And that's the whole point of this lecture on the human level, right? Is entering into these realms without being prepared and bringing forward all these technologies that basically summon these realms and leak them out onto the earth, you know, because you just have no concept of what you're doing, or you're just completely possessed by these beings, right? So another thing about electricity, and even these other forces as well that are in the subplanes, but really electricity and the increased electrification of the earth, is it actually makes it harder for people to think. So we keep just putting all these satellites, Starlink, into the atmosphere, right? That are basically radiating down on us. And no one really goes and says, you know, what is the spiritual effect of that? What is going to be the effect on our consciousness as electrical beings, as beings of ether, as beings of consciousness? What is that going to do? We just keep putting more and more. We don't even really need them, honestly. We keep surrounding the earth with all these satellites that are basically radiating down on us, creating a live electric mass. And what happens to consciousness, and Rudolf Steiner knew this 100 years ago with electricity, and they knew this actually, they were noticing that the more electrified the cities would become and people would become, the less they could think properly. And so the more electrified the earth becomes, the harder it is to think, because it directly interferes with the head. Electrical currents directly interfere with the head. And so the more electrified the earth becomes, the harder it is to think your own thoughts, the harder it is to think, because that actually interferes with our mind. And we all know, well, not everybody, but a lot of MK Ultra and mind control experiments directly include electricity. They directly include, magnets, and they include these devices essentially. And so, you know, we need to be careful moving forward that we're not basically creating the environment of the subatomic plane on the earth, of the hell realms on the earth, by having the earth swimming in electricity and radiation and Wi-Fi. You know, it affects your consciousness. It is silly to be like, yeah, I want like 10G, I want 50G, and to just go head forward into that and not stop for 1 second and think, well, is this going to affect our thinking? Is this going to affect our mind? Of course it is. You know, so we need to maybe pump the brakes a little bit with that. Okay, here is a quote from Rudolf Steiner on electricity being a medium for demonic forces. And in particular, already in the fifth epoch, which is ours, it will be possible for men to bring evil over the earth by exploiting the force of electricity, which will assume far greater dimensions than hitherto. Even directly out of the force of electricity itself, evil comes over the earth. Now, it was really, and that's from GA 273. And I found that, you know, these lecture series, that lecture was really interesting. And his lectures on electricity and the Antichrist are interesting as well, because he did not hold back. You know, when he was visioning and looking into the future, you know, he actually, at one point, he actually said that atoms and like the electrical forces are basically tiny demons if the people who are working with them are not of the highest spiritual nature. They basically are by default tiny little demonic entities. So he really didn't hold back, and there were so many great quotes about this that were in the Steiner lectures that, he didn't hold back about what he thought about these super technologies and working with the atom and electricity and magnetism. It was definitely how Rudolf Steiner saw the Antichrist coming forward. He saw these forces as being detrimental to humanity if used by unethical people. There was a great concern that these forces were just being treated like, this is science. This is just natural science. This is just, there is no good, there is no evil, there is no spiritual world. This is just science. We're just going to approach extremely dangerous spiritual things like it's just science. And this was something that really worried him, to the point when he was looking into the future at the end of the post-Atlantean epoch, he's like, I see the world covered by basically an etheric electrical mass of radiation and electricity and magnetism, to the point that it's like a synthetic, mechanical, self-functioning world. This is where this ends up going, because the ultimate goal for people creating these technologies, whether they know it or not, they're being used to basically create the eighth sphere on Earth. They're being used. They're being lied to keep this development of technology going, pushing into heights that are not even necessary for existence, honest existence. You don't need that. Not where we are at our development. We don't need these things. But it's being pushed because there needs to be that unnatural electrical radiation sphere around the Earth by the end of our epoch. That needs to happen for Ahriman, for Antichrist forces. That's what needs to happen, because those are the forces that they exist in. So the Earth will eventually become a sphere in which Ahriman and Ahrimanic spirits can outwardly live and control. This is the goal. If the Earth becomes a living electric mass, this means it will be impossible for entities within the subatomic level of existence. This means it will be possible for the entities within the subatomic existence to roam free. So if you take the natural Earth, right, the organic natural Earth, and you override every single organic process with a synthetic one, which is exactly what we're seeing. Every being has to be genetically modified, okay? Every child has to become synthetic and genetically modified. We have to have all of these machines built that do everything for us, because we don't understand the nature in simple tasks, and chopping wood and carrying water, cooking, right? These are the acts that slow us down, that get us into our body, that connect us with God, because they're simple. All of that is being removed in the favor of hyper technology, a hyper technological society that makes it impossible to think, that makes it difficult to function. And everything organic, everything natural is redone in a synthetic way, whether it be genetically, which I've spoken about a lot, or whether it be through actually creating machines to do things. So the mechanical nature of the subatomic plane of hell, of the lower realms, is made on Earth by these people that are possessed by these dark forces. That is what Antichrist is. That is what they want. To create a synthetic Earth. Everything is rewritten by man, because the only way to get man to do these things is to make man think he's God. The higher path is to humble yourself before God. The lower path is to think that you are God. Yeah, I can redesign a human being. I can create a human being. I can practice eugenics, right? Like this is the Darwinian, stuff that goes on. That's You know, the natural logical conclusion to Darwinism is basically eugenics. Survival of the fittest, might is right. Some people should exist, some shouldn't. Genetic engineering of certain beings at the expense of everything natural and mysterious that makes us who we are. This is the way of Antichrist. That is the culture of Antichrist. To the point that there's even a false atmosphere created out of electricity and radiation, a kind of false charged ether, magnetism. It's like literally creating the subatomic planes hell around Earth, because those are the things that exist. That is the nature of those planes, and you're bringing it to the Earth, making Earth a machine. The machine nature is the nature of the realm of death. The more machine-like humanity becomes, the more like death they become, okay? The more machine-like the Earth becomes, the more like death the Earth becomes. Okay. So the living etheric mass means it will be possible for the entities on the subatomic level of existence to roam free. This is because demonic forces from the subplanes of the Earth live in electricity. Electricity is their medium. And in the natural world is their medium in the natural world. And if electricity is one of their mediums, then it can also be used to summon them, right? Okay, so I'm just going to go into two more things. We're going to get into the importance of controlling death to Ahrimanic entities. Then we're going to get into something called the new Adam. The new Adam. Adam as in A-D-A-M, not atom, but Adam. And then we're going to close off on a brief conversation about what we can do. And then I will take your questions. So if you're having any questions that are coming up about this, do put them in the chat, and Wolf will do his best to grab them, and then I'll answer them at the end. So the Ahrimanic spirits and Ahriman, the thing that they hate most is actually when a human being dies. Now, obviously, if you're in the subatomic planes, there's kind of a feeding that can go on there. But, you know, for the Ahrimanic entities that are within the bodies of human beings, when the human being dies, that Ahrimanic entity, demonic entity, is essentially pushed out of the body. It has nowhere to live anymore. So the Ahrimanic entities, they hate death because they're basically forced out of the body that they're trying to inhabit. And so one of the things that the Ahrimanic spirits want to do is they want to prevent death. They want to stop death from happening, and they want basically bodies that can exist perpetually in the earthly realm, in the material realm. And they also want the planet to never ascend, to never rise into its etheric astral form. They want to stop it and freeze it from basically moving on. Because again, if the planet were to basically rise, then they would have to go through this process called second death in esoteric Christianity, which is basically being re-amalgamated and going through this deep and intense death process back to the planet Saturn, where they have to begin again. And so there's this incredible fear of these behind entities of losing the earth and of not having bodies. It's the main concern of demonic entities. These beings in this lower astral is they don't want human beings to die. They don't want the earth to ascend, because then again, they're going to basically have to go through their second death and leave existence. They're going to have to go back to the very beginning of creation as we know it. which will be a very difficult process for them. So everything that these forces do in these hell realms is plans and plotting and trying to prevent death, the death of the world and the death of the human body. And this is probably starting to make sense to some of you, because what do a lot of these billionaires that are obsessed with technology want? They want to live forever. You know, there's some people that just start live in the fallen angel culture, which is like, I want to live forever. I don't want to die. That's not a natural ideology. Trying to make the human body live forever is not natural. That's not a natural impulse. The natural impulse is to live and die and be reborn and to go through the process of life and death. You know, it's like saying, I don't want nighttime to come. Right? You're denying something that's natural. The only reason why that happens in the human consciousness is because of demonic possession. And these entities don't want the human body to die, because then they have to leave the human body and find another one. And so what they are going to do is to try to find a way in order to keep the human body alive so that they can enter into it and continue existing. Okay, that's what that is. With the earth, they also want to prevent the death of the earth. And so ultimately, the electrification of the earth is a way to try to freeze the earth while it's in its final stage of ascension, in this post-Atlantean epoch, its final stage of physicality, at the very end of our cycle, when it begins to rise. They want to create this radiation electrical thing around the earth, and that's actually going to act as it's going to keep it solidified. They're going to try to keep it solidified for a period of time, to keep it in the material plane. It's like locking it, trying to lock the earth in the physical plane through these technologies. So the electrification of the earth, which could also be called the machine earth, right? Because if you have a lot of these these gadgets and apparatuses that are basically radiating down radiation and magnetism and electricity, you're basically making the earth a machine. So that is to control the process of life and death of the planet. That is to keep it in this material form as long as possible. So it's trying to solidify it artificially. It's like trying to freeze it artificially so that these forces can exact their control on it and siphon off as much energy and potentially create a realm where they can live forever without ever having to worry about bodies dying. This is their ultimate goal. So it's an attempt to prevent the Earth's passage into the next phase of development. So this will also, you know, if you start changing the environment of the Earth and you start making it this electrical soup, that actually makes it easier for demonic entities to walk amongst us. It makes it easier for people to become possessed, all right? It makes it easier for that subatomic world to spill out, the hell realms to spill out. And you see more and more people starting to act like they're possessed. They're struggling mentally. They're struggling with their minds, right? Because it's no longer a natural world. And the very forces of hell, electricity, magnetism, all that contain that essences, that are dying forces, are now being thrust upon the world, as though now this natural world is now covered in the forces of the subatomic world. It's becoming a medium of the beings in that world. Okay, so we have to understand that that's what's going on. All right, so Ahrimanic beings want nothing more than to prevent death and harvest earthly forces during the death process. Thus, for a period in the final age of the earth, before the earth passes into an astral form, the earth will be falsely solidified by Ahriman in order to extract spiritual forces. The electrification and mechanization of the earth makes it a manifestation of the subnatural atomic world, and this makes it easier for demonic forces to walk the earth. All right. Let's get into the section that's called the new Adam. The new Adam. So we know that there was an earlier Adam, an earlier human form, but part deep in these occult societies, the dark occult societies today are based completely around technology. They've evolved from just being, a different, maybe the left-hand path, maybe being kind of a more selfish sort of chaos magic, but operating within certain parameters. The way that the dark occult works today and these dark occult societies work today in modern times is that they are completely obsessed with technology. They're also obsessed with space. It's really the hyper literalization of things too. That's very much part of that consciousness. But, part of it is creating something that they call the new Adam. And the new Adam is basically the new human being. And their goal is to basically roll out this idea of transhumanism and this body that never dies, this body that never decays, and to completely change the process of birth and death so that basically human beings think they're going to be in this infinite body that's better. It never dies. It's really strong. It can't be harmed. And it's totally materialistic idea of what a life should be. But they want to pitch that as being the new human, what they call the new Adam. And they want to change and control the death process so that basically when you pass away, you want to have your essence go into like the cloud or like a machine, which is basically the subplanes, and everything is constantly being recycled from the natural world into the subnatural world. And over time, there's less and less heavenly forces that are able to get in, right? So this is actually the creation of a hive mind. This is the creation of the hive mind that exists in the subplanes on Earth through technology. But it's going to be pitched probably by people like Elon Musk and other people who legitimately think that the only evolutionary path for humanity is to merge with machines. I'm sorry, even if there is, supercomputers that are being built, and even if AI becomes really smart, the answer is still not to merge with it. Okay, there are other forces at work on the earth and in the cosmos besides these machine forces. This is a lie. This is a lie that comes from incredibly materialistic thought that can only perceive materially, that is in communication with these dark, weird beings, where the only way these beings can survive is basically in a transhumanist body on a machine earth, because that is the literal manifestation of the hell realms on earth in the material plane. That's exactly what it would look like. If somebody starts telling you that the only way that we can operate in the future is by merging with AI, by merging with machine consciousness, that is a lie. And that is the spirit of Antichrist. And there's no way around it. I don't care how politically savvy someone, I mean, to be honest with you, the political side of this is important, but it's the mundane. We have a lot bigger fish to fry if we really care about future generations, if we really care about our future incarnations. We have some pretty big fish to fry when it comes to transhumanism. Okay, and the idea of the new Adam, which is a different spiritual form that is a diversion and really a fallen human form that is merged with computer consciousness. It's merged with AI. It's a machine consciousness. This is not liberation. It is the opposite. It is enslavement. But it will be called the new Adam, and these bodies won't die. Eventually, over time, these bodies won't die, which will allow these Ahrimanic spirits to live in them perpetually. There's no way that these Ahrimanic essences, these fallen essences, can become human again, really, in our cycle. They'd have to go through redemptive processes if they turn to God in order to get back in. So this is a way in which they're defying God by creating this fallen form in which that lives forever. And there's a lot more to this that we could get into, but just for time, I hope that makes sense, is that they really see this new Adam as being, there's also certain concepts in esoterica where there's a new human form that's created in every single age. And because every single age represents a different kind of consciousness. And so the human being will have different organs that develop. It'll have a different condition of consciousness. And over time, you can see the flow and evolution of the human being era to era, with the form changing a little bit every time. And so this is actually an inversion of that reality. And the people who do this have misread theosophy. They've misread anthroposophy. They've misread Eastern texts. And they've mechanized everything and hyper-literalized it into like a machine idea. Right? And so that's sort of where that is coming from. So here is Rudolf Steiner on transhumanism. You guys getting your questions ready for me? Okay. These forces of death will become stronger and stronger. And we shall find that they are related to the forces of electricity and magnetism, and those at work in machines. A man will be able, in a certain sense, to guide his intentions and his thoughts into the forces of machines. Forces in human nature that are still unknown will be discovered. Forces will act upon external electricity and magnetism. That is one problem. The bringing together of human beings with machines. And this is something which will exert ever-increasing influence on the future. This is in the 1900s. This is 100 years ago. Okay? Those concerned to present an antichrist as the real Christ will try also to make use of something that works through the most material forces, but in this way can work spiritually. Above all, they will strive to make use of electricity and earth magnetism in order to produce effects all over the world. I have shown you how earth forces rise up into what I believe, into what I have called the human double or the doppelganger. Those quotes are from GA 178. So again, we're getting this imagery of these subnatural forces, electricity, magnetism, being used in machines to let these forces spill out on the earth and to change us, to change humanity into subhuman things, unnatural things, to make the world unnatural and subhuman. That this is part of Antichrist, that this is part of the incarnation of the Antichrist, that it's part of Antichrist's spirit, which is within every single person who is in the fallen path. So, in truth, reading Revelation is great. It's awesome. But we also have to have a modernized view of what Antichrist is, what the earth infected with Ahrimanic forces is, and what it looks like. It looks like technology out of control at the expense of humanity. That's what it looks like. And if we knew that, then we may not be going so forward in what we're doing. A lot of people, again, have an antiquated look at what Armageddon is, at what Antichrist is, about what end times are. End times, Antichrist, Armageddon. This is about technology. It's about the mechanization of the human being and the earth through technology and lower forces of electricity and magnetism, changing the very nature of the human being and the planet. That is Antichrist. That is fallen behavior. So we need to understand this in a much more modernized way if we actually want to confront it. Okay? So let's conclude here. Turning the earth into a living electrical machine will temporarily prevent the earth's rise into a higher existence. It will allow demonic beings to walk the earth, as the earth will become the character of the lower world. This unnatural environment will corrupt the human mind and body so that it is difficult to operate from a place of sovereignty. It becomes hard to think when there's all these competing energies of a low frequency around you all the time. The electrical mass is essentially a hive mind, and Ahriman, the Antichrist. And it will work through Ahriman, the Antichrist, will work through people to convince people to change their form, the new Adam, to exist in this false earth, which is also the eighth sphere. Thus, from this point forward, individuals possessed by entities in lower planes will attempt to change the human form into the new Adam that operates in the hive mind. This new human form that is a machine will be the body that these lower entities can occupy. Transhumanism is the creation of bodies that can house Ahrimanic entities from the lower planes. That's all it is. Transhumanism literally is a movement that at its core is to create bodies that can house entities from the lower planes, demonic entities. That's what that is. So let's be clear about that. And the slow creep towards it, we have to be able to confront it. These entities ultimately seek to create a machine earth and machine people. So this is obviously the dark path, right? This is the dark path, but there will be a path that does not fall prey to this, that does not go into this. And I want to make that very clear. I just can't get into that path so much today because it's so imperative that we understand what is coming, because humanity is not prepared for this real technological explanation of the future and Antichrist and how demonic forces are in these things and in machines. But there is a higher path of people that move with nature, that move with the heavenly impulses, that do not go forward into this. And they walk a different path connected to different forces. And so this is a parallel kind of thing. It's a real, true bifurcation where some people will go down this path of transhumanism and other people will not. And some people will go down that path a little bit and then get out. So it's a bifurcation in which every single human being will have to choose the path that they walk. And it's complicated, and it's going to go on for thousands of years yet. But if we can get a handle on it now, if we can really understand, we can really be prepared. And you can prepare people that you love, your friends, your family. You can educate yourself. This knowledge and wisdom stays in your mind for future incarnations. Once you're educated on something, it's within your form. So we can prepare ourselves for this. We can confront this properly. But if we don't understand it in its darkness, then we can't confront it. So what can we do? Well, we can obviously educate ourselves, but we have to become extremely moral, extremely ethical. We have to become more spiritual. We have to really rise to taking our spirituality seriously. And we have to oppose the people that are trying to usher us in to this dark path, that want to eventually make the earth a living electric mass. We have to oppose that. We have to say, no, we're not interested in that, because that's what they would like to have happen. But if we can fight it and raise awareness about it, then they're still going to try, but it can be of a much less degree if we catch it now. Okay. So thank you guys so much. I am now going to see what your questions are for me, and we'll do some questions here. Wow, lots of questions. Okay. So for those of you who are watching this on my private platform, I'm not going to be saying your names. And then those people that are watching it on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble, I will be saying your names. So what is the difference between the subatomic realm and the lower astral plane? Or are these different names for the same realm? They are the same realm. So I will timestamp this, and I will put the exact time mark where I say all of the different words for the lower astral plane and the subatomic plane. That's actually why understanding these concepts can become so difficult, is that everybody uses different terminology for the same thing. Some people come from this Eastern position, some people come from Theosophy, some people come from Anthroposophy, some people come from different teachers that have made up a different language, their own language. And it makes it really hard to actually sometimes understand esoteric literature, because we don't have a consensus around language. So the subatomic realm is the subnatural realm. It is the lower astral plane. It includes the lower astral plane. It includes the eighth sphere and the teachings of the eighth sphere. It is the sub-earthly plane. It is the subterranean spheres, all of that. It is hell. It is Hades. It's all of that. It's all the same thing. When you hear about it in myths, so when you hear about going into the underworld, or when you hear about going into a Monty in the Egyptian mysteries and the Egyptian myths, you're hearing the experience of the soul in the subplanes. When you hear something like astral, lower astral plane, eighth sphere, subnatural plane, subnatural worlds, you're hearing a more official term and description about what that is. So in myths and religious teachings that explain the soul's experience in the lower planes, there's a certain language, the underworld, purgatory, hell. But then when you get into the esoteric study of it, usually they'll describe it more scientifically by calling it like a loka or a plane or what have you. So it depends on where you enter into the topic, whether it be from myth, which is the very early way of describing death and the lower realms, or the more modern way, which is where we actually name them objectively. Okay, ramblings of a mystic. Once the earth ascends, what is left? Once the earth ascends, will what is left, her physical husk, become the eighth sphere? And will the souls who do not ascend then need to graduate that school? Your insights are much appreciated. Yes, essentially that is correct. That is my understanding of it. The teachings of the eighth sphere are a deep part of the mystery of birth and death. And the mysteries of death, the eighth sphere, were some of the most protected mysteries in mystery schools, mainly because, these different teachers, they understood that we would eventually be facing Antichrist, which is sort of the culmination of the worst evil imaginable. And they felt that if they revealed too much about the eighth sphere and the subatomic world, that these dark forces would basically use that information and manipulate it and profane it and confuse it so that humanity would be unable to decipher when the time came what was really going on. And so the mysteries around death, the mysteries around the eighth sphere and the creation of it were always very protected, and they were never really spoken about. And that was because they had to be revealed in a much closer period of time to when the earth was to become this electric mass, and the death and birth of the earth would occur. The death and rebirth of the earth would occur. We had the knowledge had to be preserved until a certain point. And that's why it's like harder in a sense to fit in there, because it wasn't taught all the time, basically. And so my understanding is that there's a corpse of the earth, and the higher earth, which is the glorified earth, which is the exact same thing as Christ's erection body. And so basically that rises, and then the lower husk is surrounded by an electric mass. And it's really like electricity, magnetism, radiation. And that would be, in my opinion, what the eighth sphere is. And it's that way because all those forces are the same forces that are in the lower planes. And so the higher resurrection body goes up like this. And then this shell, this husk is left. But Ahriman really seeks to try to keep this, it's like a Frankenstein situation. Like he wants to keep this husk alive, because that's what they feed on. That's their world, in a sense. So yes, that would be, in my opinion, that is the eighth sphere. And normally, like if you think of this as being a natural condition of the earth, normally you would just have the husk, right? And then it would sort of dissolve, and the forces that were there would go to wherever was necessary for them to go. Some would go into second death or what have you. The mystery of death occurs there. The forces go differently. But this is like an artificial hanging on, right? That's what makes us a little bit different than other periods where the earth would be a husk, where it's kind of in like a pralaya, because the earth has gone through this before, where there's just a husk, right? All right. If the subnatural world is mechanical, when it runs out of energy, is that when the souls trapped are dissolved? Yes, exactly. So there is a concept in Christian esoterica called the second death. And this applies to the mystery of the second death. It does exist within other traditions, but in the Christian esoteric tradition, what really comes forward is the necessity in confronting evil. So that's really what makes Christian mysticism different than some of the Eastern mysticisms, is that when you come into esoteric Christianity, it directly confronts evil. And it's about confronting evil because it's, in the Christian esoteric system, it's becoming a holy individual. And to become a holy individual, you have to face evil. And so there is a lot deeper knowledge in the Christian esoteric system, therefore, about evil and about what it does and what happens. It goes much deeper in the Western system as to what that evil is, because that's the whole point of the Western, that's not the whole point, but that's a major part of it. Duality, individuality, that kind of thing. And so we see that, the duality of good and evil, and we see that in the esoteric Christian tradition, there's the mystery of second death, which is when there have been forces that have already been existing in a purgatorial state or in a subearthly state, and they have, in their period of time, they've been unable to get out of it, and they go through a second death. Now, in the Edgar Cayce work, this second death is explored as returning to Saturn. Saturn is the beginning of the Saturn sphere, is sometimes called the original sun, or it represents the very beginning of our solar system. And that location in the cosmos is not physically, okay, but the spiritual, that spiritual representation is like going back to the beginning. And so Edgar Cayce said this is where souls go to begin again. And so basically there is sort of a sorting out that happens. And if you go through that process, you have to go through another unwinding, essentially through a black sun that goes to Saturn, and you have to begin again. That is my understanding of the system. So that's why they want to create this artificial electrical Earth that's trying to freeze the Earth and have these bodies basically as batteries and this life force, is because, listen, these Ahrimanic spirits, they don't want to go through that, because that is extremely painful. Because even if you're a dark entity, that second death will be just like a mirroring process of who you are and what you've done. So they want to avoid that like the plague. Okay. Amanda Baker. Is there corridors in between, ways between planes? I have come across a void, but it was a white void. Yeah, some people, it's very interesting because there is, if you have a near-death experience, or if you're doing meditation work, usually there are different experiences of people crossing the threshold. Now, usually that depends on the individual. And it depends on your inner lexicon of symbology and imagery that is your life. But yes, you can have usually some experience of passing through a void, passing through a door. There's going to be some imagery of probably crossing the threshold. But with practice and self-knowledge, you'll begin to develop the ability to know the forces that you encounter and to understand the nature of the experiences you encounter. So the only way to really understand what an entity is that you're encountering, or what an experience is to practice. It is to have a strong spiritual practice, a meditation practice, and that you're educating yourself on spiritual science The only way you can ever know what these things are for sure is by educating yourself and having a spiritual practice. And over time, you basically develop a sensitivity to such a degree that you know the nature of everything that you encounter, or you get better and better at it. There's always going to be, there's always going to be blind spots, right? Because we're not perfect, but you can greatly improve to the point where you have a lot of confidence and insight in certain experiences that you have. Wayne Mateus, could AI serve as a channel for entities from the spirit realm, light or dark? Analogous to the way a hermit crab takes over an empty shell. Exactly. So we came down pretty hard on Ahriman today and on the plans that he has for the future, the machine world and AI. But, it's a good reminder, Wayne, that, when Rudolf Steiner was bringing this forward, the forces were really, they're neutral in a sense. They don't have to, there's a way where we could develop machines and AI where it's not demonic. That is there. And I think a lot of people who are really interested in technology, I think they may have that intention. They may have a heart that's full of curiosity, and they may really see how incredible it is to create technologies, and it is. But we can't be naive to the spiritual world, and that's exactly what's happening, is that when we are naive to the spiritual world, and especially the subplanes of the spiritual world and the earth, then you're not just developing AI. You're not just developing, when you understand that demonic forces live in electricity naturally, in magnetism naturally, because magnetism and electricity are decaying spiritual forces. Electricity is light that is dying. It is light that is in a death cycle. And magnetism, I believe, is, I don't know if it's chemical ether that's in a death cycle. So it's not bad that light dies and is thrust into the subatomic world. That's not a bad thing. That's death is part of reality. We have to understand that the forces in that are going to be from that world. It's not the same as light from the sun. All right. So it is possible that, you could use technologies for good. And I think Atlantis is a good example of when humanity was in a little bit of a different condition and had psychic technologies, right? It's possible to do that. And in fact, in Rudolf Steiner's work, he talks about a time in the future where we will have these kinds of technologies again, though they're going to operate differently than they did in Atlantis, obviously, because it's going to have a lot more to do with the individuality. Whereas in earlier periods of this technology, which quite frankly is what a lot of people base it on, the forces were assumed to just be pure all the time. And the human being was assumed to be pure all the time. And you were just by default channeling the most pure sources. Well, this is humanity really in kind of an unfallen state with not very much of an I developed. In Lemuria and Atlantis, technology doesn't work that way anymore. And so there's a lot of people that still think that they're operating in this Atlantean consciousness or this Lemurian consciousness where, you just purely channeling God all the time. And it's not true. There are dark, the lower realms today are full of dark forces. After so many cycles of the Earth's development, there's so much dark stuff in there that we have to confront. So we can't treat, every single time you open up to spirit, you can't just assume it's going to be a higher being. Every time you turn on a machine, you just can't think that it's going to be tapping into heaven. I mean, this is the extreme and dangerous naivety. You can't just build machine intelligence and AI and just think that it's going to be neutral. I mean, this is just complete ignorance of how the world works, how the spiritual world works. And I think a lot of the people at the very top of this development know exactly how it works. And when you make the deal with the devil, you live in a delusion and you think that you're going to reap all the rewards and be a god and that everyone's going to bow to you and all this kind of stuff, because that's what demonic entities do. So could AI serve as a channel for entities from the spiritual realm, like a hermit crab takes over an empty shell? Absolutely. That's exactly what we're going to see. There is no reason why you couldn't create a device that is essentially, summoning a demon. I mean, these forces exist. They're surrounding us all the time. They're looking to communicate. Right. And so that's exactly what it is. So I think that's one of the things that we're it's so funny because I remember seeing it's not funny, but I think for Halloween, like Ouija, the company made an online Ouija board and all these people were playing with it, and Cern will make all these weird jokes about creating a black hole and summoning demons. And then, they had Susan Treister, who was an occult artist, live in CERN, sleeping in CERN, waking in CERN. And she created a tarot deck. I have it. So, I mean, at the very top level, these people that are creating AI, that are doing particle accelerator, they know all about the occult. How do you think they got the technology to do this? There's lower demonic beings that they see the future. They're trying to get the earth to turn into this electric mass, and they need to have these clueless scientists develop all of this stuff and unleash it. This is what these dark entities want. Right? So, all right. Would it not be in the human tasks to assist the stuck backwards beings in moving forward, especially in that they are not free and we are? Could this be the third stream that survives to leave no corpse of the earth? Yes. So this is the job of the human being. The human being is also the redeemer. And just by human beings existing in a mineral existence or in a physical existence, we are actually liberating elemental beings that are mineral beings. We're actually liberating what an anthroposophy is called the mineral plane. We're liberating the mineral world. So just our very existence, just by living in a loving way, in a moral way, we liberate spiritual beings all the time. That's the purpose of our existence. We not only liberate ourselves from matter, right? We're also liberating the elemental beings that make up our form. And in the archetypal sense, because we are connected to God the Father, we are connected to Christ, we are connected to Holy Spirit, we're also connected to Sorath, the negative aspect of the Holy Father, the darkest element of the Holy Father, the black sun, right? And we're also connected to Ahriman, the false Christ, the Antichrist. And we're connected to Lucifer, the false Holy Spirit essence. So we are connected to all of these forces, and they stand around us. And through our actions, through our thoughts, through our very being, we liberate them, we redeem them. And in anthroposophy, it's very clear that we can redeem Lucifer through selflessness, right? We redeem these entities that are trapped in the lower planes through doing what they could not have done. And so let's look at this in the frame of Christian esotericism, which is that Christ came to the earth and he did something that we could not do to redeem us, which was to resurrect. And through that process, we will learn how to resurrect in the future. because that is the skill set that we will learn that some people will be able to learn how to do in the future. So we were redeemed by the holy individuality that was Christ and Jesus. So that's our redemption there. And the way that we live our life, we are also redeeming through doing what others could not do, in a sense, for them, because we're attached to them. And that's also how the collective consciousness works, is that when a bunch of people start to act in a certain way and live in a certain way, it becomes easier for others. So redeeming and redemption is part of our existence. It's why we're here. And it becomes easier and easier when we ourselves can live a moral life, when we can live a spiritual life. And so absolutely, this is such a good question. We are absolutely here to be a source of positivity and redemption for beings in the lower planes, for the elemental forces in nature, and so on. And the last part is, can this be a third stream that strives to leave no corpse on the earth? I mean, yeah. I'm not sure what about leaving no corpse on the earth. I believe that it is nature and it is destiny that the earth turns into a corpse. But I think that the whole goal is through our own spiritualization, we can make that process better. It doesn't have to be really devastating if we learn to live spiritually, right? Tina Elizabeth, isn't what you're describing about the Earth's transformation a reflection or projection of us as a collective? Yeah, so whatever's happening in the macrocosm is happening in the microcosm. So you see humanity beginning as an astral form on the astral Earth, right? And then materializing and then resurrecting or spiritualizing out of matter. But through this process, there are so many little battles that are occurring. There's so many small developments that are happening, you know? So it's going on in the macro, it's going on in the cosmos at large. Even other planets are experiencing certain waves of this, right? And then it's also happening within the individuality. Absolutely. Shane Boydston, what happens to a person who becomes like a machine? Do we just become a sort of demon or lower being? So I briefly touched on this in the War of All Against All lecture. But when a human being becomes machine-like, it means that they have not really developed their soul or their I, their individuality. And so in that sense, they're developmentally behind. They don't have their soul developed. They haven't chosen to forge it in their life. And so when that machine consciousness comes around, the people who really kind of go gung-ho into that, it's almost like it's happening because that's how they already are. They're not awake, and they're living, and you know what Gurdjieff would say, they're living as a machine man. You know, Gurdjieff, in his work, he would talk about how if humanity could not wake up, they would just be an automaton. They would just be like a machine. They would just live an automatic life of reaction after reaction after reaction, instinct after instinct after instinct. But that humanity had to go inward and awaken and break out of that machine-like existence. And they had to develop their I, their individuality. They had to know themselves. They had to go through this whole process of awakening to their spiritual identity and become a spiritual person. But you have to work for it. And so the subconscious nature of the human being is instinct. It is a machine. If we don't stop that, if we don't become aware of our impulses, if we don't become aware of our thoughts, we become a machine. And so on a deeper level, transhumanism and the machine world that Ahriman wants to create with this electrical mass, that's just a manifestation of how some people are existing. They are not operating consciously. They are literally a human machine. They don't have any chips in their brain. They don't have a machine part. But how they're operating is basically as a machine. And so in that way, they're not developed, right? And that is over the next several thousand years, there will be chaos, periods of chaos. There'll be periods of joy too, but there will be periods of contrast where people will either begin to awaken, right? And develop that, and they won't have to go through that. But if people after 4,000 years, if there are people that are still not awakening, they're still not able to override their impulses, understand themselves, then those are the people that are most susceptible to entering into the machine world, because they really haven't established themselves to be anything different than a machine, right? Okay, Mike Yeda, would you say that Lucifer is a bigger influence in modern popular culture than anything else? Yeah, so Lucifer is obviously fallen angel, and he's portrayed, I think in Dante's Divine Comedy, he's portrayed as, existing in the core of the earth. He's like chained there since his fall around the Lemurian epoch. And Lucifer's influence is profound on humanity. When Lucifer is taking over someone's consciousness, they have this just desire to just be free at any cost. There's a desire to destroy tradition. Any rule, any law, any tradition is toxic to Lucifer. Lucifer is always striving to be free. Lucifer always wants to be liberated from any physical structure. Right. We are talking about the inner earth being made of extreme expansion impulses and then contraction. Well, Lucifer is the extreme expansion impulse at any cost. Ahriman is the extreme contraction impulse at any cost. And so Lucifer is most visible like in the New Age, visible in, I think he's everywhere, really. But Ahriman is too. Ahriman is exacting his forces in natural science and in any kind of dogmatism. And they really do work together. But I would say they're both a pretty big influence, and they really feed on each other by pulling the human being off track. But there's no question that, the Luciferic spirits and the Ahrimanic spirits and people, you either overcome them or they take you over. And you can see that society is being challenged to overcome them, which is why it's so important to get this information out there, because it's not good enough anymore to just say, oh, the devil, oh, the dark realms. We have to be exact about what these forces are. And that's why I've chosen to use the Anthroposophical system, because we can very clearly see the forces of Lucifer and Ahriman as forces of evil. Again, they're even shown in the subatomic realms as being expansion and contraction. That is the deepest understanding of what evil is, right? So we're seeing it definitely in I think, when you look at modern celebrities and pop culture, Lucifer is very there. But when you look at modern science, you can definitely see Ahriman's hands all over that. Okay. Okay, I've intercepted a beingness in electricity to have an essence of myself present within. Is our interactions with technology and electricity a look into the dark sun or shadow self? Are we to create a type of bridge with this part of self with conscious use of technology and electricity. Yes, exactly. So the idea is to very clearly and objectively understand what electricity is. It is dying light. It is light that is decaying. Okay, it is in the sub-realms of existence. We have to know what that is. And once we understand what that force is, then we understand, oh, okay, well, if this is actually something that is coming from the hell realms, really, then that means that in order to use it, I have to be extremely moral. I have to be extremely spiritual in order, if we're going to go down and start summoning these forces up with machines, then we have to become even more moral. And so the idea is that you can use magnetism, you can use electricity, you can use forces from that sphere, but you just have to become extremely moral person, right? That's the thing. What the problem is that people are like letting loose with these forces, and they're not even spiritually developed. They don't even think they have a soul, some of these people. And that is why it's a problem. And so, yes, the subplanes. Now, this is not in anthroposophy that I'm aware of, but in my own clairvoyant knowledge and vision, the subplanes and the core of the earth is actually a black sun force. And that parallels, obviously, the white sun force. I talked about black sun and white sun in different lectures before. But yeah, the black sun force is in the heart of the earth. And when you interact with it, it's depending on the nature of your own soul, it will either send you backwards to Saturn, which is a cone of evolution that we've already had. We've already had the Saturn evolution. We already had sun evolution and moon evolution, according to esoteric science. So this is like bringing you backwards through the moon, black sun, and to Saturn, and you have to go through that whole arc again, right? And then if you have your eye developed, if you're spiritual, then you can pass through that, following the circuitry of your own soul into the higher worlds. So it's that whole imagery of Egypt where you're weighing your soul against a feather. You're weighing your heart against a feather on a scale. This is like what the inner world is like, is you're being broken apart until you pass through what I see as a black sun force that is at the center of the earth, that either brings you backwards to second death, or you go forward yet again into an even higher existence. So that's why also when you look at the evil trinity, which is Sorath and the Asuras, they're associated with Saturn development, the time before the sun, the sun period. And they're also associated with black sun. And they also directly oppose the Father, which is the Logos, which is the white sun. And then you have that negative trinity, which is Ahriman and Lucifer, that are existing in this, cast down in the subplanes, that confront Christ and the Holy Spirit. Right? We've had the incarnation of Lucifer. We've had the incarnation of Christ in Jesus. And now we have the incarnation of Ahriman. And I will be going more into this in other lectures because I was doing... Okay, well, I wasn't doing the numbers because that's not really my thing. But I was looking at some numbers that other people did, and I found some really interesting things about Ahriman and Sorath and their incarnation. So I am going to go into that in another lecture in this series. Sebastian Kastenmiller. We see an epoch in time like upside bell form, like an upside bell curve. Yeah. So at the end of the epoch we are spiritualizing and becoming the etheric body, correct? Is there something to say about the process outside the bell curve? Right. So we are looking at a bell curve when we're looking at an epoch. You see, obviously, humanity materialize, the earth materialize, and then spiritualize. And again, the mystery of spiritualization is the mystery of resurrection, which is part of the mystery of the subplanes, right? So there are always periods in every single planetary stage or every single epoch, and even times within cultural epochs, where there are beings, either from the heavenly planes or soul forces, that are cast out of the life wave. They no longer can participate in natural evolution. Now, this is because they have not developed the qualities of the next stage of humanity. So every single era that we see evolves is an initiation for humanity. They have to develop a certain quality. You know, the middle of the Atlantean epoch, we got our I, our individuality. We became individuals. We became sovereign. And a whole bunch of things happened in the cosmos when that happened as well. You know, the Earth basically came under a quarantine. The Earth has things around it that, you know, no living things can come in like they used to. There's a whole thing that happened when we got our I that is not well understood in esoterica today. And so we have to develop that I, obviously, until the end of our era, right? And if you don't develop it, then you don't have the quality of soul that's going to move on to the next phase. This isn't someone judging you in the clouds. This isn't some external source saying you can't continue. It's literally a lack of development that stops people from moving forward. And they, in a sense, turn their back on God and start following a shadow path. So in the time of the I, where we're supposed to develop a healthy ego, a healthy sense of self, in our period, those that develop an unhealthy ego that become selfish, that want to be God, that is the worst egomania ever. That is the worst use of your I that you were given ever, is to think that now I have an individuality and a sense of ego. I'm going to use that to be God now. That's going to stop your evolution. You don't understand what the task was. You didn't get the assignment. You didn't achieve it. And that's what draws you down into the subworlds and into these relationships with demonic entities and stuff. And eventually, that's what even causes higher beings. Even angels can be cast down. We know that. We know that through the biblical work and even other work. Even Eastern teachings talk about this. We know that through anthroposophy. We know that in 1879, there was another fall of angels to the planet. There was another battle in heaven. And this happens throughout our development. And these beings are outside of the bell curve. They're outside of the life wave. And they're functioning in a different kind of existence. And you would also call that, they're in the eighth sphere, really. They're in the lower planes of decay and of inhumanness and subhuman, because you immediately become inhuman if you can't evolve properly. Once you enter the subworlds, you begin to decay. This is why when you see images of Lucifer, when you see images of Ahrimanic spirits, if you see images of beings that are demonic, they look like animals. They're horned. This is because they're not human anymore. And they begin to take on the characteristics of the lower kingdoms. The lower kingdoms are not bad, but they're not human. And so this is showing the fall. Okay, that's how that's represented in art. Okay, is the plan to lower the frequencies of Earth so much so Ahriman can incarnate? Exactly. So the plan is to, how you lower the frequency of the Earth is you create synthetic frequencies that rival nature. So how you lower and kind of destroy the essence of the Earth is you create false versions of what exists. So you take the human being and you make it so they no longer operate organically, like through introducing mRNA or something, a competing process inside the human being so that they're no longer a natural system that's running. I'm sorry, but this is reality. Okay. You want to take everything that exists that is of God, every tree, every piece of fruit, and you want to genetically modify. You want to genetically modify people. Why? Because they're no longer operating in the direct image of God. Now there's something that is within them that is synthetic. That is a separate system that's operating from a different paradigm. Because a human being, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much power you have, you're not God. So you have this human thing, this fallen thing that is overriding, rewriting nature. And that creates a synthetic competing frequency. And that's when it lowers, is because it's competing, right? This is why you see this desire to like do all this weird eugenic stuff with CRISPR. This is why you see in the spiritual movement this idea that, you know, aliens created humanity and that, you know, you have to be a hybrid. It's control of the genome. It's control of human genetics that they want, because that allows these dark forces to get in, right? And then with the earth, what you're basically doing is you're introducing subatomic energies and drawing the earth down. You're drawing it down, down and down and down. Exactly. You're lowering it by surrounding it with all these frequencies. So it falsely solidifies it. So yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And in order for these demonic entities that live in the lower planes to walk the earth can't be natural, because the natural world is a direct embodiment of heaven, right? The natural world is a mirror of the heavenly planes that we materialized from. And only in recent times, when we became these like scientific maniacs, where we're able to like, you know, create all these technologies that can change the environment, that can rewrite the human genetic code, we become these maniacs. And that is what does it, because you're basically saying, I am better at creating a world than God, and it's just not true. And that's how Ahriman is able to incarnate. That's what gives him all these forces, is things become unnatural. And human beings think that they're God. That's the perfect environment for Ahriman. Okay, we're going to do a couple more. True Nemesis Prime. The lower entities would want the earth itself to be run by electricity, right? When it becomes a corpse like Frankenstein, but on a world stage, yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I see it, because if you were to go into the lower planes, it's like a world of electricity and magnetism. Like that's how we would, from the earthly plane, and physicality in the natural world, if we were to like look into the sub realms, we would see it as basically electricity and magnetism, and I think radiation, and that's how we would see it, because that's how those spirits are manifesting themselves in our world. So in our earthly sight, without clairvoyant vision, we just see electricity. But if we were to really look at it with clairvoyance, you would actually be looking into the hell realms, and you would actually see energies. You'd see elementals moving in electricity. You would see harmonic spirits moving in that. And so from the earthly plane, we see electricity, or we feel magnetism. These forces are present. We think they're of our plane. No, those are manifestations of the subplanes. All right. And if you are a magician, if you're a person, you can learn how to wield those, which means you're basically controlling the elementals of death. and the beings that control death and rebirth. It means that you are able to summon those things down there through those forces, right? And it's crazy to think about it that way because, you know, we look at electricity and we just think, oh, cool, like my light is on. Neat. I can listen to my music. We think it's just a natural thing. We don't know the difference between natural light from the sun, stars, and electrical light. We think it's all the same. And this is the problem, is we're not understanding the spiritual qualities and the spiritual forces behind the world that we're living in, and that makes us very susceptible. Okay, this one is from Nathan Coldies. Could the saturation of the earth with blood that is necessary for Ahriman's incarnation be considered an inversion of the mystery of Golgotha? Yes. So there's been a lot of thinking about when Ahriman, which is the Antichrist in the Anthroposophical system, what will that look like? What will that be like? Who is he? Is he here? We know that he's coming. We don't really know much else about that, but I think it's safe to say that he's going to have some very strong connection to technology and even be, you know, a cyborg, you know, himself. All right. Which is Dark Journalist's analysis there. So, yes, I do think one of the things that's been obviously I've been thinking about with the Israeli and Palestinian conflict is that we have this massive fighting over the Holy Land where the mystery of Golgotha occurred. And we know that we have the incarnation of the Antichrist coming soon. So I can't let it go that there could be something to do with that. I am going to be doing a lecture in this series called, you know, the New Adam, and I'll go a little bit more, I think, into Antichrist there, but I think that there is an inverse ritual that has to occur to essentially summon the essence of Ahriman from the subnatural realms. Well, listen, we understand that, and I've said this many different times, where, you know, when people start playing around with nukes and smashing particles together, listen, you're opening a door to the hell realms. You're opening a door to Hades, and that's where Sorath is, that's where Lucifer is, that's where Ahriman is. It's very clear. That's the structure. So for me, I get really suspicious about any kind of particle acceleration, any kind of idea about nuclear bombs being detonated near Golgotha is like, I mean, I'm sure some people just see that for like the military level of it, the political level of it, but now you're getting into Antichrist. You are literally opening the abyss. That's another word for the subatomic realm. You are opening the abyss right where Christ was crucified. And the whole purpose, let's not forget, the whole purpose of Antichrist, of Ahriman, is to remove Christ's sacrifice. That's ultimately what Ahriman does when he incarnates. And that's ultimately why the world has to become in his world. It has to become this electrical, magnetic radiation mass. Is because, listen, if you're a machine, a transhumanist, if you're a transhumanist body, if you're a cyborg, right, in a hive mind, then you're not going to be able to resurrect. in a way that Christ did. So that is stealing that spiritual process from you. Make no mistake. This whole electrification of the earth, this whole transhumanism movement, AI, Neuralink, all of it is to prevent Christ's sacrifice from affecting certain people on the earth. That's what that is. That's what that does, because it changes the human body into a machine, not an organic body, which means it does not operate properly. Now, maybe down the line, there will be something else that goes on. I mean, this is a different conversation. I don't know. But that is what that is. Ahriman seeks to make it as though Christ never came to the earth at all. And he does this by solidifying, densifying the body, fragmenting, breaking it up by transhumanism, and by changing the nature of the earth so that and the nature of consciousness so that people can't even sense Christ within themselves to learn how to do resurrection. They can't learn to glorify the etheric body. That's what that is. That's how dangerous this is for the soul. Really dark stuff. Okay. But yes, there's a whole inverse ritual that has to happen in order to release Ahriman from the hell world, right? So they got to break him out of there, and then they got to put him in a body, right? So now you're getting into some real Babylonian black magic there, some real golem sort of, homunculus sort of stuff. Do entities in the subnatural realms eat what is washed off us during the death process? Exactly. Brilliant observation. Exactly. The whole death process for the elementals in that realm, but also for the lower astral forms like Lucifer, Ahriman, fallen angels, they feed on humanity's energy. They feed on humanity's energy when human beings are on the surface, walking around and angry and mad and fighting and killing each other. That's food for Ahriman. That's food for them. That's why all this dark stuff goes on back to back all the time, is because there's people on the earth that are benefiting from sacrificing people to these forces. Sorry, but that's what's going on, especially now, as we get closer and closer to Ahriman's incarnation, or when Ahriman will enter that body. So normally there would be just, how the death plane would have looked before it became so complex after so much cosmic evolution. It would have just been full of basically simple elemental beings that just carried out the process of decay, which meant that they would be self-sustaining on that. Just like, how, the First Nations people used to call vultures the golden purifiers, because they would consume the dead flesh and purify the land by stopping the putrefaction from sitting too long. This is the same kind of thing with the elementals there, is they would just process death. But now there's entities there that are way more complex than a simple elemental. And they're actually creating systems on the earth through their mind, through their very essence, to feed themselves in the natural earthly world and bring it down. And so it's a whole complex system now in the subearthly world of fallen angels and dark entities that are basically creating hierarchical systems on the planet to feed themselves. And this is what the Matrix is all about. It's what, everything about the demonic entities, the battle between light and dark. There's angelic forces that are, trying to keep people connected to higher worlds and keep the evolution within the life wave. These darker forces trying to drop people down. That's our life, right? But yes, essentially, when we go through the underworld, when we pass, everything earthly is eaten away from us. And that process we experience as mirroring, releasing. If we have a lot of attachments and darkness, we experience that in an intensity, but then it's redistributed, and what's left is our purified I, if we have one, right? If you don't have that, then that you kind of can get trapped in that, which is another mystery that was really held back from people because of how dark it is. But that's one of the mysteries of death. Okay, I'm gonna do a few more questions here. We'll maybe do 3 or 4, and then we will call it a day. Okay. In practical terms, what are the most important things for us to do at this point? Meaning, how can we protect ourselves from these forces? Great. And this is from Sonic Druid. So the first thing is to be educated. Okay. I'm going to have, probably by tomorrow, I will put all of my resources in the description center section of this YouTube video. So you guys have a lot of resources to study this. You have to understand the structure first. You have to cognitively know what's going on. Because if you don't understand the subplanes, death, and you don't understand the end of our epoch and what we're heading into and Ahriman and all that, then you can't recognize it when it confronts you in the world. You'll automatically think that it's like something else. So if you're not equipped with knowledge, you cannot recognize it around you. So the first thing is to have a spiritual study where you study these things, you become aware of them, because only when you're aware of them can you begin to see how they're manifesting in the world. Very, very important. You know, even as psychics and intuitives, you're not meant to like intuit everything yourself. That's impossible. We're meant to study objectively the science of spirit, spiritual science. And that way when we encounter something, we're like, oh, I think that's that. And that is how we are able to get information even from the angels and our guides on how to protect ourselves. We have to be able to recognize it in the world. We can't recognize it in the world, we're lost, right? The other thing to do is to make sure that you have a strong spiritual practice. You've got to be meditating. All right. The whole theme of this is the mechanization of humanity. Humanity has to rise out of becoming a creature of impulse, of reactivity. That's a machine by definition. If you are just behaving on impulse and you're not stopping and examining, wait, why am I thinking this thought? Is this really me? Is this really healthy? Do I need to examine myself? Is this an intrusive thought? Because some of the thoughts that we think that, especially that are like really intrusive and like urges that are really dark, sometimes that's actually an Ahrimanic or Luciferic entity, right? And you're out of balance. And these are forces that are now trying to work through you, right? So you have to be very aware of your mind, your thoughts. You have to break up any patterns of automation within you, like Gurdjieff says, right? And so we have to rise to become conscious and spiritually aware as people and no longer be automated, living on instinct. But to do that, we have to learn to observe our own mind. We have to learn to heal our wounds. And so the answer to all of this is always how you're living your life. There's no magic formula to stop the forces from the lower spheres from interacting with you. It's part of our destiny to overcome them. All we can do is become aware of them and live our life in such a way where we're always reaching for higher branches, where we are confronting the darkness within us, because we know that the darkness within our own hearts, the hatred within our own hearts, is what allows those forces to exist within us. And we overcome that within ourselves. We stop these forces from having effect on ourselves, but also on Earth. Okay? So it's how you live your life. And yeah, we'll go deeper in this in other lectures on healthy living and things like this. But you know, this lecture is really about, listen, let's lay out the next 4,000 years or so. Let's really look at it. Let's really look at it. And let's look at Antichrist. Let's look at how it manifests. Let's look at everything around this, honestly. Let's pull back the curtains and just look at it. You know, that's what this lecture is about. And it really is the beginning of our conversation here. We're going to talk about this a lot more. Leave me your questions in the comments. We're not going to leave a stone unturned. We're going to make this very, very clear, because that's what is necessary. Okay, so do let me know in the comment section your questions as well if you're watching this on the replay. Okay. Clobro, how can we recognize our doppelganger at play in our everyday life? Is it different than just our shadow and trauma? What happens to it at death? Yeah, so the doppelganger is fascinating. The teaching of the doppelganger is also the teaching of the etheric body. And basically our etheric body produces doppelgangers, or kind of has doppelgangers. It's crazy how that works. But in the Lemurian epoch, the doppelganger was a Luciferian reptilian looking thing. That's why Lucifer is often portrayed as being a snake. I covered this in my Lemurian lecture series. And then our doppelganger in the post-Atlantean era is Ahriman. And so before we were facing Lucifer, now we're facing Ahriman. And there was a doppelganger for each period. And it's sort of like our shadow self. And obviously Antichrist is our collective shadow self, our collective doppelganger. But we each have one. And this enters into our body when we're born. The essence of this enters into our body when we're born. And it lives in the electrical system and also the nervous system of our body. Fascinating. And so that's actually how we confront our shadow. That's how we confront the dark nature of our own age and of the cosmos, is interacting with this doppelganger. I've seen mine before. I've seen it several times. And its nature is very cold, very calculated. It's not loving. It doesn't have a soul. It's just like something with extremely high intelligence, yet no soul, is basically like what that is. And that's why we see it manifest. We see that Ahrimanic impulse, and other people's Ahrimanic doppelgangers. I think some of them have completely taken over their being. You know, I think that Ahrimanic essence has taken them over, because they have that calculated psychopathic nature that characterizes Ahriman, right? It's really scary, actually. It's actually scary, you know, when you're doing anything and you come across something that's without a soul. It is terrifying, you know, but it is also a lesson as to what a soul is and what love is, right? So the doppelganger, or this etheric projection that we have, that is harmonic within our own spiritual self, you know, it's to confront the harmonic forces, right, is there because of our sort of ignorance, or because of shadow, because of trauma. Your amount of trauma and shadow will basically determine how controlled you are by your harmonic doppelganger, your harmonic aspect, if you will. But everybody has one. Everybody has one. I'll make sure I'm answering it fully. And yeah, so with this aspect, this harmonic doppelganger that we all have, when you die, it's basically cast out of your being. So it's kind of like, this is like a dark angel, because you know how when you die, when you're born, you have an angel that is your guardian angel, probably many different angels, but you have one that's like attached to you, that is your angel, or your higher angel. I think might be called, there's a more official word for it, but it is escaping me. And then there's also this lower force that also is with you, which is kind of like the devil on your shoulder, which people don't really talk about much because it scares people. That force has to leave your body when you die. And it's basically just, wandering the earth, essentially. And these Ahrimanic spirits, many of them, I believe, fell when the Ahrimanic spirits fell in 1879. They fell in and were cast into the lower plane. And ever since then, they've been wandering the earth looking for a human form to live in, so that their bottom part, their essence, is in the subplanes, in the subatomic worlds, the hell world, but they want to reach up into the natural world and exist there through having a body. So they have to basically, if you die, that Ahrimanic essence is cast out of you. You go through your death process, and it is basically wandering the world for another form to inhabit. And this is why transhumanism is so important to these Ahrimanic entities, is because they don't ever want to be cast out of the human form, because that's very threatening to them. Because if they can't find another human form to live in, right, then they're basically going to be sucked down deeper and deeper into Hades, into the subatomic world, and through the black sun, and go through second death. There's going to have to be something that happens to them that's probably very dark and karmic if they can't keep attaching to people. And so that's why it's so important to see the mechanization of the earth and all of this transhumanism stuff for really what it is, and to not be glamorized by its promises, and really understand the spirit. If you can understand what's going on spiritually behind it, you'll never look at it the same again. And that's basically what happens. That's basically what happens to them after death. Okay, if Dr. Joseph Farrell is right, and nuclear detonations can open a portal to another realm, and the Earth electric grids are fully connected to every continent by above water cables, can plasma entities wrap around the planet? Yeah, so there's also underwater cables. There's a whole, I think it's called the octopus system. There's actually a bunch of oceanic cables that run under the water. And there's also, obviously, the Earth has been increasingly electrified since, obviously, the 1900s. Every decade moving forward, it really seems like we're just finding more and more, subnatural frequencies to, bathe the world in, that we need for all these technologies. We don't need to understand how to grow food, or, what our soul is, or how to evolve our soul, or we don't need to understand the mysteries of resurrection. No, we need to have 10G in the sky beaming down on us. This is the insanity of the time that we're living in. So there has long been, obviously, serious occult considerations around the detonation of nuclear weapons. This conversation really came to the forefront in the mid-century, when we see that Jack Parsons was communicating with Aleister Crowley to do a ritual called the Babalon working. The Babalon working was essentially an incarnation ritual. According to people who, read Jack Parsons' diaries and studied him. He was working with Crowley and some other people. I don't know if L. Ron Hubbard was part of that part, but the cosmic soap opera spaceman himself was involved at some point with Jack. And so Jack Parsons was using Crowleyan style, magic, which you could really just call it, it's Babylonian magic. And, to be clear, the angels that fell in 1879, the Ahrimanic angels that fell in that time period were of the Babylonian impulse. They're of the lunar Babylonian impulse. And so that's the nature of those angelic spirits. They're saturated, those fallen angels are saturated in the Babylonian lunar impulse. Okay, that's the nature of their essence and their wisdom, their knowledge. Don't forget that a fallen angel and angels or spiritual beings in the lower planes can have incredible intelligence. They just have no soul. They just have no spiritual development, right? And so Jack Parsons, the whole thing was that when you detonate a nuclear bomb, they realized that they could rip into the subatomic world. And now through this lecture, we understand that subatomic world is hell. That's how we would know it in our own mythology. In classical esoterica, it would be called the lower astral or the eighth sphere. That's literally what happens when you detonate a nuclear bomb. So anytime you hear that kind of stuff, particle acceleration, anytime you're smashing or ripping into the atomic level, which is just electricity, coagulated, you are going into the eighth sphere. You're going into the lower astral. That's what is happening. And that is the ultimate goal for dark magicians. Why? Because all of the deities that they communicate with, that give them knowledge, exist there. And there are tons of elemental forces that are the forces of death and other forces of nature too that can come under their influence as well. But they can do their bidding. So that subatomic world that is Hades, it is everything to the black magician. It is everything. It's their entire system. If you're a dark magician, your entire system is, how can I get into this plane and how can I release what's there for power? That's what that is. Make no mistake. So can the detonation of a nuclear bomb, which I call nuclear magic, yeah, that's what that's for. We see it as being like some kind of war game, some kind of like militaristic action. Not to the people who created it. That's the lowest level of what nuclear research is. We need to think about Antichrist. We need to think about what was Jack Parsons doing? What is going on behind with all this? And also, I want to bring your attention to Mars mysteries as well. And my video called The Mars Line. Because the occult secret of nuclear magic is the occult secret of the black sun, which was a massive part of Mars, which I've talked about in many of my lectures. And the people that believe they're from there, and the technologies that they have and that they're obsessed with as part of their religious system, which found its peak in Babylon, in Sumeria, that region there. This is a whole stream of forces that we're looking at, that are dancing, that are playing, that are shadow dancing. So, yeah, there are, yes, that's absolutely true. When Steiner was lecturing on Antichrist and Ahriman, the whole lead up to that was concern about people one day being able to penetrate the atom, and that was, the ultimate no kind of thing. And that once that happens, that the world would never be the same. And the reason why was because suddenly you'd have these dark magicians that would be able to literally crack open the gates of hell. Because before, in the time of, John Dee, there were natural barriers to doing these things. You could only do them in certain astrological times. If you really wanted to summon something, you'd have to have a really powerful psychic. You'd have to have a really powerful magician that could generate certain frequencies with the perfect alignment, with the right herbs and the right symbols. And if you got something wrong, like it's, you've missed your opportunity. That's what magic used to be like. Now, there's machines for that. What could only be done naturally once in a while or through extreme stress and sacrifice, is being done with a machine with absolutely no spiritual development and no responsibility at all. And there's absolutely a grid system. We know that. We know that there's a grid system. I would agree with that. And we know that there's a false grid system, which is being created with electrical impulses, right? So there's a real Earth grid system that exists that is charged and part of a cycle of natural forces by the poles and by the Earth itself. But then with the electrification of the Earth, you're really creating an unnatural grid system, aren't you? So yes, I would agree with that. Okay, last question. Jump in Jupiter. I'm so basic. I just want to know what to do to make goodness reign. Is that hopeless? Is there always a balancing negativity? Or when we insist upon goodness, do we go to another realm? I think it's good to be simple. If you want to make goodness reign, then be good. See good in others. Be kind. If you want your life to be that way, then you have to be that way. And it actually becomes easier to have goodness reign when you understand the complexities of the cosmos, because you actually become more confident in your being. You become more confident in who you are, because you understand how everything works. You understand how powerful you are. And this is actually a good question to end on, because if you have and you acknowledge Christ in your heart and Christ in the world, that is your greatest protection, your greatest inspiration. With that force, you can face anything and you can overcome anything. And that Ahrimanic Doppelgänger, all these forces can't touch you. That's the mystery of Christ, is that you can stand with these forces and they can do nothing to you. You look at them and they become terrified. This is something that you can do through knowing Christ within yourself and holding Christ within your heart. And everyone has that. There's not a person on this earth that does not have Christ burning within their heart. No matter how much you turn away from Christ, he will never turn away from you. And we use that power in our hearts to overcome our own shadow, overcome our own darkness. And that then purifies us life after life after life, so that we actually eventually transcend this world altogether. We no longer have to interact with these forces. And eventually, if we can do it, many of these forces can be redeemed through us. That's the beauty of this. We're not victims. We're not subject to these dark forces. And ultimately, they are vehicles for our growth. Without them, we would not be able to catalyze ourselves into our highest level of becoming. So in a way, these darker forces do serve a service to us. Don't forget that. No matter where you are, no matter how dark you feel you are in your life, you always have the power of Christ and love within your heart, and you can always sink into that and dip into that. And that begins to change things, begins to transform you. I have a lecture on this called the etherization of the blood, which is that when we attune our heart center to Christ within ourselves, and Christ is also the solar force, he's the greatest solar spirit, we begin to purify ourselves. We begin to attune ourselves with the spiritual worlds. And through our inspired action, through the way that we think, we release a lot of the stuff that pulls us into darkness, and we even begin to redeem the beings that are down there. And we become the redeemer. Okay? That's the beauty of all of this. And I know that it is absolutely like a darker conversation, and but it's much worse to not know. It's much worse to not understand it. Now we do. And now we know what to do about it as well. And you know, absolutely leave your questions in the comments. I will do follow-up video. I'm going to continue lecturing on this, and I'm going to go to your shout outs now. Okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you for the super chats. I forgot about super chats, y'all. It has been a minute since I've been on YouTube. I usually live stream. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Also, if you like this live format where I answer your questions and we talk, I go live on my private platform every other Sunday. So I won't be lecturing on YouTube next Sunday. I will be on my private platform taking potentially your questions. And that's your opportunity to ask me anything. We go so much deeper than anything I could do on YouTube. And I just really focus in on what you want to hear, what you want to know. There's forums there to discuss all of this with other people. There's a psychic forum where you can give readings, get readings. Oh, it's just great. It's an amazing community. We do like little movie nights and stuff. It's really fun. So do check me out over there. You can make a donation. That's a good way. If you're a member, it's a good way to keep this channel alive, keep these lectures alive. Yeah, or you can make a donation on my website as well. Okay, super chats. Dario Darkangelo, CS, Catherine Massetti, Mara Stevens, Shiva, Benjamin Brewer, Maddie, and the Dream Detective. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the support. It means the world to me. And I will sign off. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed it. And do sign up for my newsletter where I can email you whenever I have a lecture here or if anything's going on my website, just to keep up to date on what's going on. I'd love to see you there. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave the rest of you guys to your Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me. All my love your way, and I'll see you in our next stream.